This is the Danger Close podcast, Beyond the Books with me, Jack Carr. Welcome to the Danger Close podcast, an Ironclad original presented by Navy Federal Credit Union. Before we get started, I want to remind you that In the Blood hits shelves on May 17th and is available now for pre-order in audio, ebook, and in hardcover. My guest today, Matt Graham, founder, owner, operator of Aries watches. If you followed me for a while, you know that I am a huge fan of all he has going on. The Aries watch is amazing, and it may have found its way into the terminal list that is coming to Amazon Prime Video on July 1st. So Matt Graham has a love of watches, obviously started out as a police officer, then moved into the Air Marshals after September 11th, and eventually to the Central Intelligence Agency, training our operatives who go downrange doing bad things to bad people. And just an awesome guy. So now, without further ado, Matt Graham. So much I want to talk to you about because I'm so fired up. I love when guys get out of doing whatever they've been doing before in a previous life, find that next passion, and then just hit the ground running and crush it. And that is what you have done right here.
We're getting there.
With Aries. Look at this. I got, here we go. I got these guys right here. Bam. Well, actually, I should show the camera over there. But I got these guys, and then the one here. This is the first one, right, that I wear most often.
Well, thanks for having me. Hey, and I mean this. I know what it takes to sit in this seat and be with you now, and so thank you.
Oh, man,
thank you.
It's an honor to talk to you. Now, what I like the best about doing a podcast is that it gives me an excuse to talk to people I want to talk to, and there's a few things. I mean, and you know, because we talk on text, we talk on the phone every now and again. But we don't sit down for an hour and talk. There's like nobody out anymore that I sit down for an hour and talk with because there's just so much going on. So this gives me an excuse to do that and put the.
I typically try to avoid hour-long talks now. I'm like, if I'm in an hour-long conversation, something's critically wrong.
Oh no!
Like it is like, oh geez.
Well, I want to talk to you about that, about things that may have gone wrong, or things that you have learned from as you transitioned into Aries. But first off, also, man, obviously, love the watches.
Thank you.
People can keep an eye out in the Amazon Prime series of the Terminal List because there's at least one.
I know there's one pretty one in there.
That it's in there. There might be some others too, because you were kind enough to send out a bunch of watches for people, and sincerely appreciate all that. So I know that it's in there once for sure, very prominently, and hope it got in there a few other times as well. So,
yeah, thank you for that.
Oh, thank you. Thank you,
yeah.
Man. These things are on the wrists of some really cool people out there that are living life, doing the job.
We're the finest timer that we can't show. So it's I get wrist shots all the time from guys where you're like, yeah, this is basically like not able to be. Yeah, like it comes to me on signal and dies 5 seconds after I open it. And it was just like, oh, this is. It'd be like, that'd be really cool. Like our Instagram would be 10 times better if we could show these things.
I know. I've got a few of those recently from Ukraine. I'm sure you did as well. Right. That disappeared fairly quickly. Yeah. I love what you're doing. But let's get into a little background.
Thank you.
Like, where did the watch passion come from early on, or were you drawn towards service? 12 years old.
12 years old.
Okay.
So just on the other side of this highway are a bunch of cornfields and crop fields.
Yeah.
And when I was 12, I started working in the spinach fields, which, if you don't know, is a thing. It's a thing. So I was working on a local farm, saving up all my money. Started liking watches about then, because liking those watches in that 5th, 6th grade time frame also brought in Mac Bolin.
Nice.
Brought in some of the Phoenix Force stuff. Brought in First Blood. Brought in all of the. So up here in the Northwest, this small town of about 2,500 people, there's really not much going on. So later on, when I started working at the agency, so even the existence of the agency was only in books, in movies, right? It's not tangible. Like when you're in Virginia Beach and you want to talk to somebody in the Navy, it's pretty easy, right? Because the Navy's there. when you're in DC and you're walking through the grocery store, everybody you bump into is like, oh, I work at the agency or I work at some other thing. And you're like, oh, this is crazy. Up here,
Yeah.
north of Seattle, it doesn't exist. So it was all books at that point, because even I think at that point, I don't know if that was the time that my parents were anti-TV, but I knew that we didn't have a VCR. You used to have to rent the VCR when you rented the movie.
Wow.
And you'd bring it home and then you'd watch a movie. So for me, I just really liked watches, just really liked them. Loved the idea. And we're on the water, so I can see the bay right now, and it's all stormy and white cappy. But so being in proximity to the water with diving and swimming and that water culture, it kind of led me to the dive watch, the Breitling watch that we talked about that has the compass inside and all of those
I looked
things.
at
So my whole adolescence, kind of the thing that I would nerd out about would be watches. It's like everything, you know, once you have a niche or something you like, you see it everywhere. So I followed it, looked at it, would read about them, and they were always kind of unobtainable. But I took my first big batch. It's the same reason that I have a bunch of shoes. So if you are in the office and you see behind my desk, there's 40 pairs of Jordans from all generations.
No way.
It's insane. Once I built out my office, my wife was very first thing my wife said was, she's like, well, I know where your shoes can go. Like, this is great. Like, I know where you can. So once I had that packet of money, I used to get a single pair of shoes every year, school shoes, right? You have your school shoes, you wear them all the way through until the next year. And I had a big wad of money, and we were at the mall and walked by the display case. It was the Citizen dive watch that came in the little scuba tank.
Oh, yeah.
Which to this day, I don't know that it actually came in the tank. I think the guy just saw me like crying and excited and gave me the display tank.
Yeah.
I still have it.
It was wrapped around the display like it would be a wrist for those listening. I think it was it yellow or orange?
It's a yellow. It's a yellow scuba tank with a Citizen sticker.
Yep.
And then it has a little plastic apparatus on the top. And then the bottom is rubber, and you can enclave the watch in it, but most of them are displayed as part of that piece. So I spent all my money. My mom questioned me 3 times. She's like, are you sure you want to do this? And I was like, yeah. She's like, are you sure? Because this means you don't have other stuff. And I'm like, that's cool. And I still got it.
Nice.
So it's the one. It's
That's
the one
amazing.
that broke me.
I think so. Mine, because we just moved recently, and my rubber strap on that same watch, I did not get the tank as we discussed. But the rubber strap that had the dive table on the strap, like that broke off at some point. The rubber just got, because I did wear it. I wore it diving in all sorts of different places, and that eventually just got brittle from sitting around, and it just broke.
Well, I mean, think about how long it's been. That's the other thing where you and I are similar.
It's like 1990,
in age.
maybe. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's one of those things where we're like, man, I don't know why the rubber broke. And you're like, well, maybe it broke because it's 40 years ago.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. And I don't think, and back then it was, maybe it was, they made it a different
horrible
way.
rubber.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
kind of like windows
good
around
rubber.
like your old vehicles, the window around the windows would just break eventually, and you had to put new ones on. But same type of deal.
Apparently Icon replaces those, but for a guy like me, I still have the originals. So
Icon does replace those. Yeah, I think they upcharge a little bit on on that service.
Something I'll never know.
No, I don't know. You're doing amazing work, and but I love that watch. We have that watch in common. I brought one over here. We also have. So this was the one from Rambo 3 right there. That Sylvester Stallone. This is not the actual one that Sylvester Stallone wore. But once again, when I became aware of this watch through U.S. Cavalry Brigade Quartermaster back in the day in like 1980, this was 1988, 89, I think.
Maybe in the back of Shotgun News.
Probably in back of Shotgun News. But I remember this, and it was 300, or I want to say like 350, 375. That was like, might have been $3 million back then. So I got this way later. About 10 years ago or so, or 15 years ago now, but I'm still looking for that new in box.
So am I.
Anybody that has that Chronosport UDT timer, new in box. I'll still looking for that. So need to replace the battery in here. But other than that, this thing is great. And I had another one that got stolen in a backpack years ago. I'm so bummed. I know. So I had to find it. So luckily I tracked this one down right after. But
so our very first two-tone diver one, stainless body with a black bezel and crown.
Mm-hmm.
That we call our combo -1C. So our very first one went out to a guy. His name's Craig. He's a heavy equipment truck driver operator in the oil fields in the Midwest, and he had bought the diver one like you wear,
Mm-hmm.
and it got stolen because they work in like a camp type
Mhm.
environment. So he just texted me or emailed me one day, and he was like, "Hey, just to let you know, I have serial number such and such, and it was stolen from base camp when I was out working. So if you ever see it, it's stolen. So try to get it back to me." And at the time, kind of like right now, as we build them, right, because we make everything, the only watch that I had that was fungible was the one I was wearing. It was the first Diver 1C. So I put it in a box and shipped it
Oh,
to him. And I was
man.
like, "Hey, man, here."
Dude.
So he, um, along the lines of you having your stuff stolen, it was one of those times where I'd even talked to my wife Heidi about it. I was like, "Yeah, she's like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm sending this guy my watch. Like, he needs a timer." Um, so I sent it out to him, and it was one of those things where it was like, that's the cool side of what we get to do,
Wow.
right? Like, you're in charge. Like, we're the adults. I get to make the decisions on my end of how we're going to run it. And I'm like, yeah, I'll just send him this one.
Amazing.
So that's about 3 years ago, and we've kept in touch. So
That's amazing. But you know what?
yeah.
That today, when you're building a business, like there'd be no, and that's not why you did it, so that people would know about it. But it's just a general thing that it's who you are. Like doing that for that guy, doing this stuff for me, sending them to the set, giving them the guys that are out there operating to test them, just being a generally good guy. Like that's natural. It's not like you're like, hey, I should do this for the business. It comes across, it's natural, it's authentic, which today means so much more than it did in 1985, because in 1985, you had no idea.
Nobody knew.
You have no touch
That's a
point.
catch-22 though, brother.
I know.
So the and you know this from so I will do it and I'll always do it. And
Mhm.
we'll do it from a standpoint like the gracious things you do for people, where it's like, hey, you're not looking for any of that recognition or attribution with it because of just who you are. But the flip side of that, in today's social world, one of the things that I also struggle with as a small business is that's not how the bulk of social interacts.
Mhm.
So not only has the last 2 years of captivity changed everybody, people are just different now. And so you can do these things, and then the only thing people hear is, that one lone voice where it's like when you read your bad book reviews.
Yeah.
I want to tell you, and I mean this sincerely, how engaging and supportive that is to people like me, who I have nowhere near the visibility that you have, and nobody dives into every turn of phrase on me the way they do with you. But in my own world, it's super difficult because that's right. It's the squeaky wheel. It's the
Uh-huh.
thing you hear. It's driving down the freeway when your wiper clicks and you're like, oh
Mhm.
my God, this is a 1,000-mile trip. um, so thank you for that. Part of me starting this podcast piece is, and when people say it, like we have the whole thing written out that you have written out, like, oh, here's what the podcast is going to be about. And you
Mhm.
go to that whole snippet, right? The
Mhm.
elevator pitch. But when people ask me directly, we just had a whole building full of people yesterday from their local car club that we try to support. And someone was like, oh, a podcast studio. You do a podcast? And I was like, yeah, we're starting it tomorrow. And she said, why do you do it? And I'm like, therapy. That's why I do it. I was like, that's
Yeah.
the whole, I was like, honestly, for me to be able to discuss things in long form
Yeah.
that we can't discuss in short form,
Exactly.
and to engage with people like Craig, the truck driver,
Mhm.
where we're like, hey man, I'd love to sit across the table from Craig and see what got him to his point in life that he would buy a diver one and be out there working in the fields. And then when it gets stolen, just kind of be like, yeah, man, that's why we exist.
Wow.
Or when Mike, your guy from this show, got a hold of me, I videoed, we were still in the Connex when we sent out that support box to production for you. And I videoed it because I knew, and I looked at those with me and I was like, hey man, in a year or two, we're going to get to put this video out.
Nice.
And it's going to be like, here's what we did back then that we'll now discuss with you. Like, we'll discuss it on our terms with you,
Nice.
not like you said, do something. There's a lot of people that do stuff when people are looking.
Yeah.
And it goes back to that piece where
Sure.
it was like, well, we're just going to do what we do anyway.
Right.
And we'll
Right.
take our satisfaction from the quiet stories or the non-story,
Yeah.
right? Where you're just like, of all the thousands of pieces we could put out, there's a lot of people doing a lot of good work
All right. Yeah. Absolutely.
with our timers.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, there we go. Well, then I guess I'm not going to worry about the guy that,
Yeah,
isn't in
exactly.
that.
That's great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just the kind of the nature of the beast. Lends itself obviously to some of our worst impulses. And even, for me, I want to get uh, if someone says something, I want to get drawn into it immediately, and I have to say nope. Nope. And
Yeah.
that was one of the reasons for the podcast. Really, was initially was like, I'm getting asked these questions that don't lend themselves to a one sentence response on Twitter or Instagram. More so for something like this. So I just didn't
Yeah.
engage on those sorts of things. I'm just trying
Yeah.
to keep all that stuff, the one sentence, two sentence things, that's keeping that keep it positive and just, hey, take it as it is or whatever. But for some of those other questions, some were obviously just people trying to get me to say something so they could be mad. Okay,
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
And then others were genuine. Like, what do you think of this? Like, what do you think of what's
Right.
going on in the Ukraine? Well, one sentence
Yeah.
or two sentence probably
Yeah.
isn't going to cut
Yeah.
it.
There's not an
It's going to probably
emoticon
take a little
that you
more
could-
than that. Or what do you think of
Yeah.
Afghanistan withdrawal? Well, it's probably, so I do blogs and, I go on
Yeah.
these different shows and that sort of a thing. But the podcast was something that I could do to point people towards, hey, you want to know what I think about Afghanistan? Watch podcast number 84 or whatever it might be, or hey, what's your favorite, watch? Oh, hey, check out this podcast, with Aries, boom. So it was just a way to engage with people that you couldn't have done, obviously, 30, 40 years ago.
Well, it gives you a voice
Mhm.
in your voice, which is what's important to me about it, is if anybody's going to talk about what's going on with Aries,
Yeah.
if anybody's going to talk about how we deal with things or manufacturing things or what, I'm going to talk about it, right? Like there's not going to be,
Why
there's
not?
not going to be any other
Yeah.
part of this. And if any opinion is going to get put out on something, I'm like, well, I raise my hand in the back of the room and be like, well, I kind of have an opinion on how this stuff goes. Like,
Yep.
why don't we share that?
Yep. So you had that. So you
Awesome.
got the Citizen early on. I
Yeah.
got it fairly
And
early on.
that held me.
Yeah.
That held me for like a decade, right? Like that was,
It had to
that
though,
was
right?
like- yeah. As I'm
Oh, I
walking
remember.
barefoot to middle school.
Yep.
I'm
No,
like,
I remember even the SEAL teams we first got there, and they still had the Casio G-Shock that was just the square, even though the larger
Mhm.
one, with the light on it, had come out maybe a year before I got to Buds, and then they slowly started rolling those in. But for a while, just because of that, the hockey puck G-Shock, I wore that for the longest time in the
Yeah.
teams. Then I got rid of the band though, and I used the what was it? This one right here. I put the I don't even think they make them anymore. The Waterborne from Australia, so that
Yeah,
if,
the
so that if
Australian
you
one.
lost the clip right here, you still had your
Mhm.
watch. The whole thing
Yeah.
didn't come apart, so I really liked
Yeah.
that design. So
I
I had to cut them.
I bought that band
Yeah.
and had that band. So when I went into law enforcement, I ran the G-Shock and ran it on that band
Mhm.
for the same reason. If
Yep.
you're going to roll around and scrap with somebody,
Yep.
later on you're going to have to write down what time you smacked that person. So I was like, okay, I should
Yep.
probably have this retained in some way.
Yeah,
So,
I'll tell you, the G-Shock might
yeah.
be one of the best pieces of kit we ever got issued. It was the
Yeah,
one thing
it's
that
a
really didn't
phenomenal-
change much over
Yeah.
that 20 years. I mean, we got, Garmin's and Centos and all that sort of thing in, but the early ones, especially going to plug them in, another thing to plug in. And of course, if
Right.
you're using it as the GPS compass and you're actually going out there and really doing the job, well, it didn't last very long. Remember those early ones? And I still have my early ones somewhere around here, but I'm just always back to something like this. Like
So,
I can't do the Apple
yeah.
Watch. I can't do the, all the Fitbits and all that sort of thing. Like I just can't.
So
There's
the
something about
part of
time.
the design reason behind that is, and this carries over from like an operational type of a life. And one of the things that I used to say, one of the Matt-isms that people would hear in training and teaching world is I would always say it's cute. Oh, it's cute, Jack, that you think, that kind of like, how many guys are on the other side of that door, right? Or it's cute that you think you're going to. So for us, me specifically in the design of the Diver One, it's cute that we think we're not going to get wet today,
Mhm.
right? What part of your life makes you think you're not going to be in the water?
Mhm.
And there's a huge swath of people that are like, I might, Interstate 5 that runs all the way, right, from
Mhm.
border to border. 20 miles up the road a few years ago dropped into the Skagit River. So
Wow.
as people were driving across it, 5 lanes of traffic are now in the river.
Jeez.
And you're like, well, you know, so those types of things. There's a lot of this world that I can control in my day to day, but there's a lot that I can't. So
Yeah.
it's cute that you think you're not going to get wet. So
Right.
when people say, "Oh, I wear a whatever insert type of watch,"
Yeah.
and you're like, "Well, do you wear it all the time?" You're like, "I take it off to either get in the shower, or I take it off when I'm golfing, I take it off if I'm going to go in the sauna or I'm going to mow the lawn." I'm like, how much time do you have to go in and oh, I got outfits for all these things. Like, do I got to
Yeah.
change my shoes and and for me, it's like, hey man, I put on a watch as I always do. I don't take a watch off when I sleep
Oh,
because why would I? In the
yeah.
middle of the night when I'm now up doing something else, I still need to know what time it is. So it's like, what luxury is your life? Or it's cute that you think you're not going to have to know
Yeah.
these things. So for me, it's one of those that from a design aspect, and I've never spoken of this publicly, but from a design aspect, one of the notes that I had for myself in the Diver One was make the 1911 of timers. So the cleanliness of the lines, the utility of the piece, the ability to kind of drive. So all those chamfers and angles, it's people talk about design from it's not you, it's additive. It's just like writing. It's what I hear you talk about when we talk about when you're editing.
Mhm.
You're like, okay, I'm done with it, but now I got to go through and I got to go cut out a ton of words that I put in there. And it's the same with that. There's a ton of metal on that thing that needs to go away in order to be its final place,
Yeah.
not add to it and be
Right.
like, okay, keep throwing Play-Doh on something and be like, no, man, you cut all those things away. And what you're left with is just pure function of what you need. So, um, it's the first time I've ever talked about that. It's the first time I've ever said, and I'll say this to you because we're friends. I'm happy with it. Like
Oh,
I think it's badass.
it's
And
awesome.
I have no problem saying that. And
Yeah.
the coolest part of this entire journey is right on the other side of this wall. We make those here.
That's awesome.
So we cut that steel in town. We do all of that stuff is done here. So is from a bigger issue with like a branding struggle, it's difficult, right? Because it goes back to what you talked about with those one word answers or those
Yeah.
quick snippet answers.
Right.
Where we'll get people to be like, well, I can see some machining marks. Great. You know why? Because a machinist made it. So that's why we kept the back sterile. So there's machine marks on the back of the watch. Because I wanted it to be those types of things where it's just like, hey man, we cut this and we made this. Like there's no, I was watching there's a local car club and they came in yesterday and had coffee and they were doing their big drive around the Northwest, and on our television, I had like a how it's made going.
Yeah.
And it was on cars and it showed all these automated machines and they're pressing panels and they're doing all this stuff. And you're like, where are the people?
Yeah.
The people don't make that. I mean, you choose to put every single word on that page and either leave it or take it off. And that is a direct creation of the things that you write. It goes from your mind through the process onto the paper, and then you're like, this stays, this goes. That's the minimalist of what's going to go out.
Yeah.
And in society, in production even, I don't come from this background. My dad was a fireman, right? And he built houses because firemen never work, right? They only work like 8 days a month. So he had a construction company. So for me, in building this company, what template do you use? And I'm like, I went into this ignorant, thinking, yeah, man, things are made in America. Oh, wait, no, they're not.
Yeah.
So not only are you making the things, we now have to make the tools that make the things.
Yeah.
So it's a challenge.
I'll tell you what, the back of mine, I don't see any blemishes.
Yeah, so
these are,
you
see
also
anything.
have, you have like a serial number that's you.
Yeah.
There's the variety of things that you've received in the mail where you're just like, oh, another timer, I guess.
No, they're awesome. I switch them. I switch them
Sure,
out.
your wife at times is like, why do I have to wear this?
She's used to it. She's used to a lot of this. It's been 20 21, 22 years coming up. Yeah. So she's more than used to it.
Congrats.
But,
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. But she asked me to ask you about making a woman's watch. And the woman's
So we
watch,
have
like,
one.
you do?
Yeah.
It's coming
So
out?
Actually.
Because women's they're bigger now because she has like some smaller ones from a long, long time ago.
Yeah.
But like nowadays, like, women
Well,
wear
that's
like
a good
the
look.
same
You
watch.
should do that. See, I think you should do that. What do I gotta?
Just in case you have a backup.
So when I made the very first one, my wife and I have been together for a long time, like you guys have. And so I stood in front of her. It's my childhood dream. When we started this piece, it was, do you want to build a watch or do you want to build a watch business? And those are entirely different things, right? A watch or a watch company are entirely different. So I was like, no, I want to build a watch company. I want to establish a US brand that makes mission timer watches. So we get all this stuff done and we have the very first one. So I'm standing in front of my wife and I tears in my eyes and I was like, this is for you.
Oh,
right?
Dude.
Yeah. And she looks at it and she's like, can we sell this? And I'm like, what? And she's like, is someone willing to buy this? And I was like, yeah, I hope so. And she's like, then sell it. And she said something that to this day put us where we are. And she's like, we're in the business. And she's a school teacher, right? English teacher. She's like, we're in the business of selling watches, not keeping watches. And I was like, you know what? In our old Connex office at the house, which is still there, people that would visit that are close to me I'd give them a Sharpie and they'd write on the door. And close friend Tony from the Northeast wrote on the door jam above the door, not a hobby. And that's exactly what it is. So from my wife with day one, and you have a drawer full of watches. I used to have a drawer full of watches, but I'm like, you know what? If I'm making all of these just to go in my sock drawer, we're not going to get anywhere. So if the very first one that has all the blood, sweat, and tears and love in it, she's like, hey, get it out the door, then it set the tone for everything now. We make one-off watches all the time.
Yeah.
We do color schemes. Yeah. We did a rally color scheme from a Carr thing that we made into these auto pieces, and there's only 2 of them. Elena, our head watchmaker, has one, and I have one. Oh. Well, we were at Overland this year, and a guy came up and he's like, man, I followed your brand. I heard about you through Jack. He's like, I want one, but I don't want one that everybody else has. He's like, what do you have that's special? And I was like, I got this one. You want this one?
Dang, dude.
And he's like, what's the serial number? And I said, my name. Serial number's Graham. And he was like, yeah, I'll take it. And my son was like, whoa, wait a minute.
I know.
He's like, and I was like, hey, man, we're
in the business.
We're not here to keep them. And, we could make another one. We're the adults. We can create them.
That's awesome. So. Yeah. Stephen Pressfield has that in his book, Turning Pro, the series of books he does on creativity. Yeah. Like, you flip that switch in your mind and it's not a hobby. You're a professional. Yep. You're a writer. Yep. You sit down, you write. Same thing with you. You're a watchmaker. You are in the business of making watches and selling watches. That is what you do. Instead of like, I'm going to dabble over here. I'm going to give this a try. I'm going to see if this works. And I've never been that type of person anyway, but hearing that from someone like Stephen Pressfield, it was very liberating, I would say. Hey, now I'm an author. Now I'm a writer. 100%. That's what I do. And also helps a lot with the writer's block. I hear people talking about, like, he has this great thing. He's like, you ever hear about a truck driver having trucker's block? They're like, no, you don't. That's because they're doing the job. So you're a writer, right. You sit down, you write. And for me, it's like, it just totally obliterated writer's do for me. So did you ever get watchmaker's block? No, you're in there, you're doing the job,
Yeah, there's too much going on for me to,
exactly.
get watchmaker's block.
Yeah, you don't have the luxury of it. I don't have the luxury of sitting down and having writer's block. But
it's cute that we think we'd get to do that.
It's cute. Right. What was the path into law enforcement then?
It was a job. So
were you just drawn to it because of that? Was it popular culture?
Was
both.
It
having that just
family
innate inside you? Okay.
Yeah. So we had my dad was a firefighter, came back from Vietnam, got hired at the fire department.
What did he do in Vietnam?
Seattle. He was a gunner, 1st of the 9th Air Cav.
Wow.
So he was 67 to 70.
Jeez.
Yeah. So later on, when I was in the Air Marshals, he came out and visited our office and was talking to my squad leader, team leader. and who had also served in Vietnam, and they were talking, and he was like, "Oh, you're an aircraft guy," because he flew in the original Little Birds, the Hughes 500s.
Wow.
There was one pilot and one door gunner,
No kidding.
and so they'd go fly low, draw fire, and then they'd be like, "Hey, here's where you hit."
Oh,
So he said, "You guys didn't have a good life expectancy," and he said, "No, actually, in the group, if you flew 6 months and lived, you didn't have to fly your other 6 months in country."
jeez.
And so I looked at him and I was like, "Oh, that was good." And then he looked back at my boss and he's like, "I flew 20 of 24 months."
Wow.
And you're like, "Okay." That sets the tone of like, you could have left after 6, but he was like, "Nope, that was the job and there to do the job." So,
Wow. That's like World
um,
War II, those guys, 25 bombing missions, from Great
yeah,
Britain into,
yeah.
man. Yeah, 25 and they could go home. Man.
So graduated, was going to college, was playing basketball, trying to get a scholarship, trying to do those things, traveled around looking for schools to do that, broke my foot, and that kind of took that off the table. And I have an uncle who, through a unique family structure, is only a couple of years older than me,
Okay.
and he was a cop, because his dad was a cop, and he said, "Hey, why don't you come out and ride around with me?" Right? I work night shift. Come out, ride around. We'll figure out your life. So
Wow.
I go out there. I'm riding around with him. We're talking about everything. You're going to go to school. You're going to go in the military. What are you going to do? And 12 hours later in the morning, he's like, "So what did we figure out?" And I was like, "How do you get this job? Like you drove as fast as you wanted to drive. You have a gun and you hit people with sticks and and there's zero super, like, what is this?" It's like a remember the choose your own
I
adventure
sure
stories?
do.
Yeah. And I was like, "This is insanity.
Yeah.
How do you do this?" And he was like, "Oh, is this something you're interested in?" So that started that.
No kidding.
Now, getting into that world, um, I thoroughly enjoyed, loved it, and worked up here in the city and county.
Did you have to go to
Uh, yeah,
post or
you go to,
how
yep,
does that
yeah,
work?
you do all that. And then the only thing that I was good at in that was the shooting side. So within law enforcement, like any other organization, it's stratified into, there are those that are good at certain skills. And
Mm.
in the shooting world, when you're good in the shooting world, you get kind of pulled into the tactics world,
Mhm.
that kind of a thing. So I was given a lot of other opportunities to be able to develop that. So when 9/11 kicked off, I was one of many that went online and applied for the Air Marshal program, and then went to there from here.
'Cause there
So
were air marshals before that point, right?
there were 33. Yeah.
33, but then after
33.
9/11, boom, it's
Yeah.
essentially a new program. They need to hire a
Yep.
ton of people, very highly
Yeah.
skilled. I've shot the air marshal course, but it's been 2009, I want to say I shot that thing. That was a
Yeah.
good course of fire.
It's a You got to pay attention.
Yeah, I was at the top of my
So
game at the
it's
time, so, I got
yeah.
it, but, I remember it, and I still have a printout of it in a binder in a box around here somewhere.
Yeah.
I think there may be 3 of them maybe. Anyway, I can't remember. It's been over a decade,
Yeah.
but yeah, that was a
There were a
legit
few.
course. But,
Yeah.
how did you, so you apply and they write back,
So
then
I
they
apply
say,
with
"Come on in?"
Yeah, apply with everybody else. Actually, when I was leaving the Air Marshals years later, my boss said, um, he's like, "Hey, 327,000 people applied for this job. If you, yeah,
327,000 people
yeah,"
after
and he
9/11.
said,
That
"If
is
you,
a
you,
really cool
yeah,
number.
it's one I remember. I remember a few numbers from there. The other number I remember was in my basic course. We had 30 people, so
Mhm.
30 guys in my basic class, men and women. And in 8 weeks, we did 2.4 million pistol rounds.
That is awesome.
So,
Do you go to Georgia for that?
yeah.
Do you go to federal law enforcement
No,
training?
we went down to New Mexico.
New Mexico, they have
So
their
the other
own.
FLETC,
Okay, oh,
the
there's
other
2,
FLETC
okay.
in New
I didn't know
Mexico.
that.
Yeah. So we went down there and it would be you and me standing shoulder to shoulder, and they'd put a pallet of ammo between you and
Yeah.
you would just run, you just shoot. So yeah,
Man.
30 people, 2.4 million over 8 weeks is a lot of rounds. So,
What are you shooting in training?
um,
What pistol?
229 and
Okay,
357 SIG.
okay,
Yeah. And every round is like a full duty load round, which
okay.
has, and
Yes,
so you're getting beat. Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
We can talk about that later.
Um, yeah. So,
Shoot training with
um,
what you're gonna actually shoot, so it's not a shock to you. Um,
yeah. So I was there for almost 4 years. and I was the top shooter
Of course.
in my class and in the
And for those, I'm going to jump in
field
because you're
office.
so humble about certain things. I want to ask you about a couple things later, but I know people who have trained with you in government service at the agency, and they all tell me that you are the top guy when it comes to shooting. Like you are very humble about these things, but they all say there's no one better out there with a
Well,
pistol.
well, if get a bigger group and I'll be lower in the thing. Yeah. So, um, yeah, it was like I said, it was something that I took to fairly easily, not having
Mm,
grown up that way.
yeah.
Um, but my time, I went to the Chicago field office,
Okay.
and I had 4 duty guns basically in 4 years. I'd shoot about 60 to 80,000 rounds a year.
Oh, you had 4
So
duty
you
guns because you're wearing out barrels.
yeah, yeah, wearing out a gun. So I'd shoot a gun out in a year, go in there and be like, "Hey man, need another gun." They'd give you another one. So
How long
yeah,
was
it
the
was
training
great.
part? How long was New Mexico?
New Mexico was 8 weeks, and then we went to our, Atlantic City to the FAA, to
Okay.
the actual Air Marshal, the finishing school,
Okay.
where all the simulators and aircraft
Oh,
and all that
wow.
kinda stuff is, yeah, where you go into so you recall, because you were a pre 9/11 guy,
Yeah.
pre 9/11, um, so when I was in law enforcement and started to get involved in tactics and that world, aircraft counterterrorism was limited to tiered units, right?
Mhm.
Like that's you can be a high speed guy anywhere, but if an aircraft is taken and somebody's going to do an assault on an aircraft, it's going to be a tiered group, right?
Mhm.
It's going to be one of the big three. Um, possibly an FBI HRT piece would get involved in
They
that,
had a
but
cool
other than that,
simulator before September 11th, I think. They had one
yeah,
of the
they
few.
did. Yeah, they had a couple of them.
Yeah.
So yeah, right there behind the range. So for me, when 9/11 kicked off, the mentor group that I had in my life that was former soft guys and current soft guys was like, "Hey, this is the playbook. You want to get into playbooks, you want to go do
Mhm.
linear assault on aircraft. And you're now in that linear assault piece as a small team, right?
Mhm.
2 men, 4 men, 6 men type of a thing." And I was like, "Well, that sounds daunting enough that it might be fun," right? Like that. Um, so the finishing school was a couple of weeks, and it really went to how do you operate the aircraft, right? Like if somebody's incapacitated and you have to get up there and you have to be able to land that thing, right? Like how do you deal with that? How do you mitigate all of those things? A lot of bomb work, a lot of,
And that's at the
a lot
finishing
of,
school? That's in
yeah,
okay, it's in
yeah,
Atlanta.
yeah.
Man, that
Atlantic City.
Atlantic City, sorry. Atlantic
Yeah,
City. So you go there and you're doing this finishing school and there's simulators
yeah,
there and
yeah.
there's smoke and things like
Yep.
that and lights
You
and
would you would
role
constantly hear
players
you.
and the whole
Yep,
thing.
yeah, yeah, full scale. So, we used to have mannequins because part of the you talked about qualification, and part of the one of the qualification shoots started in a seated position like we're in right now.
Mhm.
But you'd then basically get up to your feet and move throughout the aircraft, but the mannequins that were in front of you had real hair that were wigged,
Yeah.
so you got inoculated to shooting close enough to having hair wisp in front of your front sight and
Incredible.
still be able to hit things that were either stationary or moving.
Gosh.
So it was, yeah, it was a so like I said, it was a lot of shooting. I never shot that much until I went to the agency and they were like, "Hey,
You can
you can."
shoot as
So
much
when I
as you
got to
want.
the right, the line was,
What's our budget?
yeah. So I never
Yeah,
heard that line.
exactly.
What was our budget?
Exactly.
Um, I heard, you can't make a dent. You can however much you shoot, you're not gonna make a dent, so don't worry
Yeah.
about it.
Oh, that's
And I was
awesome.
like, "Okay, okay, I think I
So you
found
took
my
full
place."
advantage. I know.
Yeah, yeah,
But that's wild. So there's at this finishing school in Atlantic City, there's like a graduation and some and drills, things you have to
yep,
pass, same
yep.
type of
You
thing.
get raise
And
your hand, take the oath,
and then you do it. And so now
and you're
what
good.
happens? Now
Yeah.
you go to an actual field
Went
office and then
Yep,
your
go to a
first
field
flight,
office and
are you like right seat, left seat with someone who's been doing it for a while? Or are you like on your own?
well, that came up. So, there was a guy in my basic class, and when we got to the field office, they were discussing, like, partner pairing. So,
Hmm.
the field office is broken up into squads. So we just happen to have enough squads in our office that we numbered them like the balls on a pool table,
Mm.
and a little bit of good life uh, was we were squad 8. So we had a really cool pool ball, right? Like who wants to be like, oh, I'm the yellow stripe ball.
Right,
Like,
right.
nobody wants to do
No.
that. So I was on squad 8 and was on squad 8 the entire time I was there. And my partner was a guy that I'd gone through training with. You have a
Okay.
primary person that's your partner. And when we got there, we were told, no, you can't be together because you're new.
Mhm.
And he tells a great story about how my response to very high level management was like, hey, man, we're all new.
Right.
Like we were all, you hired
When you go, yeah.
2,000 people on the same day. So like,
Right.
what is your,
Uh-huh.
you know, you're 100 slots ahead of me in seniority, but that translates like watching F1 racing. You're like, hey man, I was 20th. And you're like, but you're only a second back.
Yeah, yeah.
So it
Yeah,
was
yeah.
like, so yeah, we paired together and you're only judged. I won't say you're only judged. For me, you're only judged on shooting and tactics, which you test regularly.
Mm.
And since we shot well and we adjudicated problems in the aircraft well, right, in training and in life, we were able to stay together. So there were many times where it's the government, so they try to entice you. They would come to us and they would say, here's a $2,500 performance award. Here's a check for $2,500.
Hey.
And it's gonna be noted on your SF-86, and here you go. And they set that check on the table for us each, and then they'd say, now what we're gonna do is we're gonna split you guys. So Matt and Jack don't get to be together anymore. You're gonna go mentor this turd over here, and you're gonna go mentor this guy over here that we need. And so what we always said, the two of us would like push the check back across the table and be like, hey, if you keep the money, can I keep the guy? Because
Yeah.
I would rather have somebody that's good in the platform
Yeah.
and not have the money.
Right.
And they were like, yeah, you could do that. And we're like, okay, well, then you keep the performance award. I'll keep my partner that we don't have problems with
Yeah.
and keep doing that. So in an organization that changes partners and rotates partners frequently, we were together the entire time until I left.
No
So,
kidding.
and he's still a little bitter. I hear from him all the time, and he's not too happy with me leaving.
Oh man.
Um,
Dude, that is wild. So I was on a plane this year at 2020. I guess it must have been 2021. So a few months ago. And so I sat down. I think I was in first class or business class or whatever. And a guy sits down next to me. I think he was already on the plane. And immediately I'm like, okay, very nondescript. And just watching people, sometimes people are like in, t-shirts and flip-flops and, these and there, okay, fine. And sometimes they're business people, their husband and wife team, go on vacation or whatever. You can kind of read, and he's very nondescript, like it's kind of businessy-ish, but not really. So the clothes weren't that expensive, but they were, weren't, they just stood out a little bit. And haircut, not too short, not too long. And I'm trying to see the watch. I didn't see the watch because he had a suit coat on. But I pulled out, so I'm reading a book, of course, that's something, I can't remember what it was, but it was something special operations, intelligence, something like that.
yeah.
I open it up and I'm reading it, and I catch his eyes like doing that. Cause I'm watching, I'm dressed like me. I'm in Solomon shoes, right? I'm in Cole pants. I have my Dynamis
You're
belt
ready to
on,
go.
which you can't see the Dynamis
You're
belt
ready to
though.
go.
Some sort of a t-shirt that's not like it's not like a Kill It Mall type shirt, but it's also maybe like a Sitka, something like that. Or maybe I got a flannel on or something. I'm just normal.
You're in the-
Eberly stock hat. So they're
Ready to go.
cues. They're little cues.
Yeah.
Probably have this, probably have the watch on.
You're ready to get tagged in, right?
Yeah,
It's
so
like
I'm like,
WWE.
it's not like crazy. It's not like there's Molly
No.
all over my stuff, but at the same time, like, okay, Sitka drifter bag. There's just little cues.
Well, the Molly guys, you can't tag in.
Yeah.
Right. Like you wouldn't tag that guy in. You'd tag in the pro.
Yeah.
Who's like, okay.
So, but it's not like I'm trying not to be me by being
No.
totally indiscreet. I'm just being me. But I see him, he's noting. I can see that he's noting these things. And I'm like, well, maybe he could be, he could be a fan. He could be just interested in these sorts of things also. But I can tell body language he wants to engage. He wants to ask me a question, but he doesn't the entire flight. And a lot of times people be like, hey, what are you reading? That's why I put headphones on. So I just try to like not talk to them. But this time I didn't, but I tried just to dissuade people, because as soon as you like close the book for a second, a lot of times people are, hey, what are you?
Yeah.
And you're like, I'm trying to work. But I can tell by his body language that he wants to ask something, but he doesn't. And so I'm doing my thing, taking notes. I'm highlighting in this, book about maybe it's like Afghanistan papers or something like that, whatever it is that I'm reading. I'm taking some notes, and he's like, I can just see like, and he wants to ask, I know. And then I thought that he might when we land and get up,
Mhm.
but he's out pretty quick, like not rushed, but not taking his time. And then he's not in the jetway because I'm right behind. Like I don't come out, not right on his heels, obviously, but he's gone. And I'm like, I think that was probably near Marshall.
I guess we'll never know. We'll never know. So I had a similar experience opposite of that, which is how I met our friend. I know you know him well, Colonel North, Oliver North.
Mhm.
So we were doing an LA to DC flight, and I was working, and he was the last to board. Our seats are up front pretty close, and he comes on. He's holding the bratwurst with all the sauerkraut, mustard dripping
Oh,
everywhere,
that's
and
so
he
great.
sits down next to me, and so he's on the inside seat next to me,
This is
and
while you're working, or this is recent,
yeah,
more recently?
no, as well as working,
Okay.
yeah. And he says, this was in '07. So um, he says, "Are you coming or going?" Right? Like just a casual. And I was like, a little of both. I'm doing a little of both. I may have just flown out here and now I'm flying
Yeah,
back.
yeah.
And so he makes a couple of comments and we talk real quick. And he's like, "Hey, are you coming or going?" And I was like, "Yeah, a little of both." And I look at him and grin and I'm like, good choice on the food there. Like, because it's just
Yeah,
it's sauerkraut on a
right.
plane and they just closed the door and it's 100 degrees in summer.
Ollie.
And I was like, great choice on that. I was like, nobody will notice. And he starts laughing. And then he kind of does what you do and he catches the vibe, right? Like we
Uh,
all feel the frequency. And he was like, "Oh, you're working." And I was like, "Yeah, but we're going to talk." I said, I remember this because we still communicate. And I said, "I hope you don't plan on taking a nap because we have a lot to talk about." And he was like, "Oh, what are we going to talk about?" And I was like, "Well, I think we could split the trip into two. In the first half, I want to talk to you about professional things. And the second half, I said, I know you're close with your kids. And I was really close with my dad, who was sick at the time.
Mm,
And I said, I want to talk about fatherhood and life and family." And he
yeah.
was like, "Okay, let's go." So the entire time,
Oh, he's
he
such a
was
good
very
guy.
gracious. Yeah, he was very gracious. So years later, and we kept in touch. And then years later, when I started doing things on Fox, the very first desk appearance I did in DC
Mm.
at the network, when I was done, he was walking in and he
No
kind of
kidding.
stopped everybody and said, "Hey, everybody,
That's
I'd
awesome.
like to introduce you to." He's like, "I know you just listened to him talk, but this is and he said some very nice things
Oh,
and
that's
was
very cool.
he's a professional. He's very gracious and very, very good. So, yeah, love that guy.
That's
He was
awesome.
he wrote a note. He wrote a good note to my dad
Oh, that's so
and
cool.
gave it to, yeah. So it was pretty slick.
Oh, that's
So
awesome. And while you're doing that job, how often are you, do you have to requalify and then not just
quarterly.
requalify, but quarterly requalifications, which is
Yeah.
not a
So
joke for those who can look. You
no.
can look up the Air Marshal test. I'm sure you can now online, or
Yeah.
one of them anyway, and they'll all be difficult. But how much are you training in there then as well?
So we used to, and I'll speak to it because it's been 20 years. We used to fly four and train one. So, um, and those four could be you leave on a Monday and come home on the fourth
Hmm.
day, or you come home every night, or you go overseas, or you stay domestic. Uh, we had close proximity to a range. We had close proximity to simulators. So
Nice.
you're constantly in that environment,
Yeah.
and um, it's just a constant. It's game time, right?
Yeah.
Like there's no. So yeah, we used to shoot a lot, and then in off time, which wasn't frequent, right? You get 2 to 3 days off a week. We'd still go train and shoot and work with stuff. I would,
Yeah.
just because of the environment you're in is a little unforgiving. You don't
Yeah.
want to start throwing 357 SIG rounds
Right.
out there and not have accountability of where they're going.
Yeah. Did you stick
It's a
with the
lot of
same
people.
pistol the whole time you were in? Was it the same one, or did you
Yeah.
ever?
So while I was there, the agency still had that platform.
Okay. Yeah.
They've since gotten rid of that platform. But when we had those guns, our duty guns had a specific serial number sequence
Mm,
that isn't out there with everybody else, right?
got
Like
it.
it's so when the government got rid of all those weapon systems and then went to something else, the partner that I had talked about hit me up and he was like, "Hey, we can buy these guns."
Nice.
Yeah. So there was a local gun shop that he had found. It wasn't the one I was issued,
Okay, but it was a
but they were
same kind.
issued
Yeah.
guns, same series, same serial number. And he was like, "Hey, they have 2 left." And so we snagged them.
Nice.
And the cool part about it is they're sequential serial numbers.
Nice.
So we were partners that entire
That's
time we
awesome.
spent together. And they're like, yeah. So then it came down to a wrestling match of who gets the lower number, right? Like we're like, "I love you, brother, but
Yeah.
I'm going to fight you for that."
Oh, that's
And then
awesome.
my answer is always, and you and I haven't done this yet, but my answer is always, "Let's shoot for it."
And he probably knew
Like,
better than to do that
that's it.
with you.
He's like, I'm like, let's shoot for it.
That's
Hey,
fantastic.
let's what? Random. Let's just shoot for it and see who wins.
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
I was like,
Oh man, that's great. And so in doing that job, how good did you get at like reading body language, that sort of a thing? Were you given courses and that sort of thing?
yeah,
Things to
yep,
look
100%.
for, all that. And then did
Yep.
you get additional training on that, or was it mostly like on the job training, and you can kind of read people as you're getting on there and do it in a way where it's not obvious? What is
Yeah.
that like?
So it's exactly what you talked about. So methods and means, like how these things work,
Mhm.
cues and indicators and things to look for. The difficult part is in that environment, there are a lot of things, if someone is stressed because they're going to act,
Yeah.
there's also people stressed because they're traveling and their flights were canceled and they're going to see, like all this other normal life stuff is going on. So, kind of what you have to wait for is those action pieces,
Mm.
right? Something's an individual or a team is going to activate, and then you're like, okay, this is it. So, um, just like the example you gave of the guy sitting next to you, the issue becomes, and we can tie this into later on in life when you learn about like surveillance detection routes.
Mhm.
The issue with a surveillance detection route, which is a path you take from point A to point B, is there's also cars on that path from point A to point B. Like all those same people have to go to the same grocery store,
Mhm.
or those same people are walking down the same sidewalk. And so, um, those same people in that airplane environment are stressed, frightened. They have plans. The guy sitting next to you absolutely could not have been a fam, but all of those other indicators paint it to where you're like, well, you could be.
Mm.
And so the best part of that blend
Mm.
is having it be where like, yeah, I guess I don't know. So
Mm.
when people look at, it's easy when you go to a stadium to know who's playing in the game because they're in the uniform and they're on the field.
Mhm.
So in that environment, it's one of those where you just kind of you got to let it float, see
Yeah.
what happens, right?
Did you ever have to
And then
change seats or ask to change seats in a plane because you noticed something, someone's body language or something like that, where you had to say, "Hey, I want to go like a seat over and back from someone just so I can have eyes on because of something that you noticed as you're like in flight or as you get on the plane or that sort of a thing?"
yeah, that's not really something that you would do.
You don't. Okay.
Yeah, that's not really something that you'd do.
Did you ever
So
have somebody, and you can and tell me, you might be getting too close, but did you ever have a seat number that you before you got on where you're like, "Hey, this person we need to keep an eye on," and you're like, check.
yeah, so there were times. So the issue with aircraft terrorism is the fact that it's very effective. So to this day, there are still individuals and groups looking to utilize commercial aviation for their means, right?
Mhm.
Whether criminal or terrorist. So it is a constant piece. So there were times in the early post 9/11 world where we would have special mission pieces where it was like, hey,
Mhm.
this isn't just a random flight.
Wow,
So
that's
yeah,
awesome.
yeah, it was interesting.
Wild. So growing up,
I mean,
obviously
there's
being
no,
what's that?
I mean, it's one of those things
Yeah,
where the platform you're on.
yeah.
So the tactics you want to engage in, right? It's just like you guys. It's the pre 9/11 teams, which I know a few guys like you that were in the pre 9/11 teams, and they're like, yeah, it was different than the post 9/11 teams
Mhm,
because of the legacy of Vietnam and the things that were going on. Um, and you're like, hey, I'm learning all these things and I want to put them to work,
mhm.
right? You want to put the tactics to work. You want to put the weapon skills to work. You want to put the camaraderie in the team. You want to test
Yeah.
this in that fire. The added piece with an aircraft is, hey man, we're at 38,000 feet. So it's not like when you fall down and you're like, "Oh, I
Right.
gotta get back up." You're like, "Oh, no, this could go sideways really bad." Um, yeah,
Yeah.
so that's the like, "Well, it's not up to me when we leave either,
That's
so
so
let's
wild.
go."
So being a student of all this well before, not well, my whole life really, and obviously in the 80s, well, 60s, 70s, and 80s, we had a slew of airline hijackings, and then
Mhm.
when we came of age in the 80s, there's some very high profile ones, of course, on the cover of Newsweek and Time Magazine and all that sort of a thing. And I knew where I was headed already, so I was already a student of warfare already. Just I think I still have a lot of those magazine articles.
I
Um,
went to that airfield. I went to Dawson's Field
did
in
you
Jordan.
really?
Yeah,
As
yeah.
part of your training or on your own?
No, just on my own. Like I'm the guy that like, sure, I guess we could,
Awesome.
when you have the ability to go someplace, and we're like, "Well, we could go to Disneyland or I could go see a pretty whatever." And I was like, "No, let's go see Dawson's Field where all these aircraft are from
Jeez.
that's it."
Are the wrecks
Right?
still
Like, I mean,
there?
it's
Is it
a
still like they blew how many
yeah,
did
when
they
I
blow
was
up that day?
there, it's
How many did they blow up there?
um oh man, I
They
can't
did the
remember
one
off the
for
top of my
sure.
head.
They
Yeah.
landed did they land
Yeah.
3? I have to go back
They
and look.
landed I thought they landed 3, uh destroyed 1, and
Mhm.
then there was activity, I think, on another,
Mm,
either on board or off board. So yeah,
yeah.
but it was, and I went. I mean, it's been almost 15 years since I went back there. So it was, but when I had the opportunity, and you're like, hey, you can go see these carvings down in Petra, or
Right.
you can. I'm like, no, let's go to this airfield. Like, here's an address. Like, I want to go to
Yeah.
this airfield and see what's going on.
Amazing. Yeah. No,
So
I mean, there's some incredible stories, obviously, and the paradigm for airline hijackings has changed. I mean, it was different, I think, by decade. If you go 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, maybe a bit of a blur conglomeration of all those different decades together. But then huge paradigm shift, obviously, on
huge.
September 11th, 2001. So for what I did, and I've never talked to anybody about this, is that just being a student of all these things, I always went with the window seat, so I would have
Mhm.
time to formulate some sort of a plan if anything happened. Like, okay, I have 3 people, they're taking over the aircraft. Okay, what typically happens in these things? Okay, X, Y, or Z. What am I going to do? What makes the most sense? So I did that. After September 11th, I went to the aisle seat. So if something happens, I can react immediately and put somebody on the ground and then deal with the next person. But having to go so quickly without letting them have time to get into that cockpit, without letting them have time to kill a stewardess or flight attendant or whatever it
Mhm.
is, but I react immediately. So that was my paradigm shift as a student of these things. I don't know if that was the right thing or not, but that was just me having studied these things. Like, well, in the past, maybe I'm going to take my time. Maybe you do nothing, depending on what develops. After September 11th, that timeline went like this as
Yeah.
far as to act. So I went to that aisle seat so I could act. And remember, they would go down the aisles in the 70s or whatever, and just smack somebody on the head. It was just
Yeah.
easier to get somebody that was in the aisle rather than to make an
Yeah.
example of them, rather than somebody that was by the window. So anyway, that's just what I did personally. I don't know what if that was the right thing or
My
not, but just as a student, that's what I did.
my Matt answer that you are now a part of will be, it's cute that you think seat position's gonna matter in that. So it was
I don't want to climb over
so
somebody to get
well,
to
I mean,
the
it is
bad
all
guy.
of it, all of it. So it goes to, and the analogy I will use is this. So in the gun culture, there is a discussion people always have, and we know these people that are like, I never sit with my back to a door. So they go into a diner and they're like, I sit right here because I don't want my back to the door. And what I would always tell people is, oh, it's cute that you think that, because if you look at workplace violence happens between employees. So while your back is to a door and the data shows it's not going to happen here, your side profile is to the kitchen where there's 100 knives and 5 people that can't make their house payment, or
Interesting.
hungover, or having problems with their relationship. So we focus on this idea of something. So in I would add that there were 2 paradigm shifts in your timeline. And the first was 9/11 with actual hijackings. And the second shift that came was the binary explosives threat in 2006. So I was a team leader on one of the flights that was scheduled to be blown up with binary
Wow.
explosives. And that changed in the entire template, because how do you do a linear assault against an idea,
Uh,
right? Like, it doesn't matter where
mm.
so if there are places where you're supposed to be to maintain control, but somebody somewhere else can just blow themselves up, then none of the things you're doing are mitigating that. So I'm a idea napkin guy.
Mm.
And on that flight, I pulled out my legal notepad and was like, man, there's some things we have to do, or we're not even able to maintain our ability to mitigate these threats because it just doesn't work, right? I mean, it's the same as being on a range. So if you're going to stand on a range and you're going to engage a target in front of you at 20 meters, but there's a target behind you that's just going to blow itself up, what are you doing? Like so there was the post 9/11 shift to hijacking teams, which is that. And then there was a second kind of a cauldron that came out of people recognizing from a threat standpoint, hey, we can just cull resources together, right? I know you've referenced before in some of your posts, so I'm not speaking of anything that I didn't see on your Instagram, of the Bojinka plot, which Bojinka was an aircraft terrorism dry run and operational run to see how binary explosives would work in taking down an aircraft. So it's just one of those things where, from a sports analogy again, because I'm a analogy guy, where you're geared up. I mean, Final Four is going on right now and all of that stuff in our culture. So you're geared up to play man-on-man defense, and the other team walks out and they're playing baseball, and you're like, we're not even in the same game.
Right. Well, they almost took one down, right? December 94 was a dry run, I think. And the pilot put a hole in the side of the plane. I think killed one passenger, and the pilot put it down in Okinawa, I believe. It was between somewhere Philippines and Japan. And then obviously because of a random fire, maybe random, maybe not so random, maybe they were working on something that's still a little bit unclear because of where it occurred. But that plot was discovered and subsequently foiled. But man, great. Well, how'd you get to the agency then after this? Like, what do you do? You get bored doing what you're doing, or you want the next thing, or do they notice you that, hey, this guy's got some skills? You ran through all the Air Marshal ammo. Yeah. And you're like,
I only have one gun here. I want more guns. I only have one gun. No, 2007, late 2006, my dad gets diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. 2007, he's undergoing treatment. 2007, I'm still at the Air Marshals. And I go in and ask for leave so I can spend time with my dad, and just denied. Like, nope, you can't take leave. I'm like, okay, can I apply for Family Medical Leave Act, which is like a thing, right? It's like the law. They're like, no, you can't do that. And I was like, well, can I go to a field office that's closer to Seattle so I can spend time when I'm not working with my dad? They're like, no. And so that's when the SAC, Special Agent in Charge of Chicago, was like, hey, 327,000 people applied for your job. If you don't want it, leave. And I was like, okay, like I'll do that. And I had worked in the FAMs with a guy who had come from the agency. And so we went to lunch. He said, before you do anything brash and kind of throw this whole thing away, let's go to lunch. So we went to lunch. He talked to me about going to work somewhere else. And I was like, well, sure. So he gave me a phone number, and I called the guy. And he said, he kind of described what I would be doing, which is teaching and training and developing in that space. And I said, well, my dad's sick and I want to spend some time with him. And he said, hey, Matt, work when you want to work, be home when you want to be home. And I was like, okay. So took the gig, initially it was a 3-year gig. So I like to say I did 13 years of a 3-year gig. That's how that went. So people always say, like, well, how'd you do it? I'm like, well, I did 13 years of a 3-year gig. So I don't know. You tell me how I did. And the most important part of that was I was able to spend time with my dad. He passed away in 2007, so I was able to be there. It was an absolute blessing. I was rubbing his chest as he took his last breath. So it was no better place to be when that happened. So we buried him out in Arlington National Cemetery and then went to work. So yeah, so it was that shift.
Wow.
So
And how much can you talk about what additional training you got during those 13 years? Like, did you get, because you do have to learn about what the people you're training are going to be
correct.
doing. And what was
Yeah.
that like?
Well, like I said earlier, that place to me only existed in books and movies.
Yeah.
So to be able to be in and I'm a history guy. So when I was going to college, before we decided we weren't right for each other, it was history and English. And um, for me, being in and around that organization, those people, that environment, the places that you're going to are iconic places. If you're like I am, and like you've talked about you being, if you're a student of the history
Hmm.
of what is going on there. So um, it was great. They're great people. A lot of what I've been able to do here at Aries comes from being involved and living in a culture where the people in the room are the people that you work with.
Mm.
So you can always what if it, you can always be like, well, let's go out and try to find other, was it Patton that talked about the executing an 80% solution today
Better than, yeah.
is
It
better
might have
than
been, yeah.
100%. Yeah. So, and so the culture of people, the environment, being involved in all of that it's exceptional. I don't believe, and I've been involved in quite a few other things. I don't believe there is a finer group of American patriots than that organization,
Yeah.
because they're not only doing what we all do, you, me, service, sacrifice, all of that, they're doing it with zero attribution and with zero expectation of
Mm.
attribution. And it just makes a really good person there. Like I'm a fan still
Yeah.
of what they're doing.
Yeah, no,
So
I one of the highlight of my time in uniform was working with those guys in Baghdad, and almost went over there. I think you know this. Dropped my papers to get out and go over there, and then
mhm,
got accepted. Had my class updated at the farm to go the ground branch route through. I won't say the name of the program, but there was a program that developed that
right.
was that they actually started in Vietnam, and then they reinstituted it after September 11th, 2001, to get a certain person into that organization. But ended up staying in the teams. But yeah, my time with those guys was certainly a career highlight, and is obviously important to me because it is woven into all of the novels, and
Yeah.
continue.
You had a pencil handy. You were like, oh, what are we doing here?
I should have taken
Hang
some
on a
better
second.
notes
I just
on
have
things
to.
actually, because I didn't. Because I'm trying in my mind. There's one particular thing I'm going back to where I'm trying to remember a certain vehicle, and I just wish I'd taken a picture of it. I was very cautious of what I took pictures of during
Yeah.
my time over
Yeah.
there, especially in that 2006 timeframe. I mean, now it would be fine, but back then I just didn't want anything electronic.
Yeah.
So I took very few photos during that stint. But I wish I'd taken a picture of one thing, and I'll tell you what it is later. But man, I'm trying to racking my brain trying to figure out what this thing is, because there could be one of two thing, and I can't remember exactly because so much time has passed, and I just conflation. I'm just not sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, did you do SDR stuff with the air marshals at all, or was that new to you? I mean, you read about it in
We
books,
did
obviously,
we
but
did, but it was a different animal. So
yeah,
with the air marshal stuff, you're confined to the aircraft
yeah,
typically, or the mode of transportation you're doing, because they're intermodal, right? So you can do air marshals are doing boats,
mm,
they're doing trains, they're doing all of that kind of stuff because they're under transportation now.
okay,
Um, but as far as like a foot surveillance piece or a
yeah.
vehicle surveillance piece, that's just not something that is
Right. I was curious if they like did it
inherent.
as far as like somebody doing it to you personally to target you somehow as part of something.
Yeah, there was,
So
yeah. So that's where we became most aware with that.
mhm,
But then in the air marshals, it was, hey man, I need your ass in a seat
mm,
first.
yeah,
So are we going to do 2 weeks or 4 weeks of
yeah,
some
yeah,
SDR work, or are we going to, put you on a plane and be like, well, if,
yeah, yeah.
if you
Take your
get
seat, son.
if you get jacked in an airport, then I guess
Yeah.
you're not the guy we thought you were. Um, but no, at the organization, that's what they're built on, right?
Yeah.
So those things and programs that you've talked about, where you were accepted into the program to go down to the farm and do those things. Yeah, it's a way of life that is just part of that, and So yeah, those training courses, those things throughout those years, we were intimately involved in doing that life skill
Yeah.
and integrating that into your everyday. So, um, yeah, it was pretty neat. What was so the side of me that can't get away from myself
Hmm.
would be in the middle of things like that and would notice something, a feature,
Mm.
a place, maybe within a location we were, and the history buff would be
Hmm.
like, "Hey, I have a
Yeah.
question. Is that where,
Right.
is that where the Delta guys practiced the breach on the wall for the embassy back in the '80s?" And
Nice.
then
Oh,
people would
wow.
be like, what are you even talking about?"
Wow.
And
That's
I'd be like,
cool.
"Oh, just checking. I just
Yeah.
wanted to, can I hop out here and
Yeah.
make this as like a,
That's awesome.
go in, like you talked about electronics. So one of the things that is, and it's kind of a detriment now to Aries social media stuff, is I'm not a guy that's used to pulling out a phone and being
Hmm.
like, "Hey, let me share this with you."
Right.
It just doesn't happen. So there are times for a long time within that organization where you would just get to spend your time. So like I would go out to some of those places, grab your morning coffee, go
Hmm.
stand there, go look at things, go kick the dirt and be like, okay, this is the feel, this is the texture, this is the history of this place that nobody's ever going to see. I'm not going to be able, like you, with not being able to go back and look at a photo of the
Hmm.
transportation piece.
Ah, you.
I have no aspect of this that I'm
Mhm.
ever going to be able to. So I better immerse myself in what it feels like, how it looks. And that's why when you get into, as a fan of yours, when you get into your books and your writing, that's what sets it apart. So for me, as a fan of you, when it's somebody's not trying to, reload the cylinder on their 1911 and you're like, well, that's not even a thing. So, um, it's one of those where it's a joy and comfort to read because you're like, yeah, man, this is a guy that knows what it feels like, what it smells like, how it is. A lot of people write things, but they can't articulate the subconscious. And the thing that I enjoy about your writing, one of the things that I enjoy, because there is a lot of them, but one of them is you can articulate a subconscious aspect to it because I think for you as a writer, it's already woven in. You can't not talk about, your thumb and the bolt release on a carbine, and then that shunk that goes through where the sound isn't a clink, it's not a clank, it's a shunk where it's just like shunk, it just drops in on, and you can hear it where you're like 3 guys away, you're like, "Hey man, I think you're on a dry chamber. I don't think it picked up a round because the shunk sounds differently." You're able to articulate those things in your writing because they're not able to be separated from us when we're working, right? So I think it gives you a depth that translates to your word better than others. And so when's the next book
That
coming
means a
out, Jack? Come
ton.
on,
That means
let's
a
get to
ton
the
to me,
let's
my
get to
man.
the
Thank you so
let's
much. That means it's good. And someone like you reads it, and you hear that from people who have done the job, who have put rounds down range and that sort of thing, or been to certain places, or been shot out, whatever it might be, been in an ambush, and you hear from them that, or it's just a description of what it feels like after. Those are the ones that are even
right,
more powerful.
right.
When someone reads something and says, there's
Yeah.
one that really stands out right after that, the first book. Where I describe the character James Reese taking a sniper shot, and then what that felt like. And someone wrote to me this really, really emotional email about how it made it okay for them to feel a certain way after they had this experience in Iraq or Afghanistan. I forget which one it was now. It's been a few years since I read that email, but that was powerful to hear
Yeah.
from someone. But yeah, I can't separate the weapons work from me in general, just today. And
That
certainly
was
not
yeah.
not in my writing, but
That was
it's
one of
just how it
the
is.
that was one of the key things. So I think you will appreciate this. There are 2 stories that I wanted to tell you, or 2 things I wanted to tell you that previously I've not talked to you about, and you're like, "Hey, let's save it for when we can chat." And one of them, first of all, I'll get the other one out of the way. One of them is in my text. When we talk, I intentionally misspell things and use the wrong, because you're a writer.
Interesting.
So for me, for humor, all my jokes are for me anyway. I don't care if anybody else laughs at my jokes. But you can go back and look at our text, because I
will.
know because my wife's an English teacher,
Oh,
so
I
I
know.
know how that works. And so I will be I'll be misspelling. I'll be the wrong connotation. I'll use the wrong possessive cases of things. And I laugh out loud when I'm like, oh, I know there's a layer of him that's going to read this and be like, oh, Graham's a dumbass. And I'm going to just be
That's
like, it's
funny.
so funny to me. So I've done that for years. Thank you for that.
Well, you're welcome. But that is interesting in that doesn't faze me at all because I'm so used to it. But did you
I
do that
know.
because you notice my texts
No.
start with a capital letter? They have a period. There's two
Oh,
spaces. Then
yeah,
it starts
right.
another capital letter. Then there,
Right.
if it's can't, there's a N and there's an apostrophe and there's a T.
Yeah.
Like, did you notice that
So
about my text? Did I write
I
them
know that. I just
the way I
know
would
that
actually
this,
write?
yeah, this aspect of you, I just know, because you know the human mind, where I'm like, I know he has to be recognizing these.
Don't let it bother me though, because it's so common.
No,
So I
and I'm
don't
not
let it
trying to do
bother
it
me.
to
That's why I
bother you.
didn't.
I'm
That's why I
just,
didn't
for
take note
me,
of
I
it.
just kind of giggle, and I'm just like, this isn't even the proper there, but I'm putting it in there.
That one's yeah, that's a tough
Yeah,
one.
right.
I do know.
There's a song.
I don't hold it against anyone. For
There's
anyone that's listening right now.
there's a song that's out there from years ago. There's a song that someone sings that has the improper use of a conjunction or that drives my wife insane.
funny.
She's like, I cannot hear that. But no, what I was talking about before was being a fan of the Mac Bolins and the Phoenix Forces and all of those things. When I was at the organization involved in weapons programs, I had the ability to go like, hey, can you bring out a Beretta 93R, please?
Nice.
Because
They had it
when are you
somewhere.
gonna get to shoot that?
That's rad.
And they're like, oh yeah, there you go. And you'd be like, okay. And you're like, well, we're gonna, it's just part of a weapons
check it out.
familiarization.
Right.
Yeah, I got to teach people about familiarization with weapon systems. Maybe you run across this in the field. So let's shoot a Beretta 93R.
Nice.
Let's run that MP5 from maybe the briefcase.
Perfect.
So all of those things,
Nice.
the little kid in me
You
was
got
able
to shoot them.
Yeah, you just write up a lesson plan, and you're like,
that's
well,
so
here's
great.
why this works. Like, this is why we're going to need one of those. And
That's
they're like,
fantastic.
oh, okay. You're like, well, I mean, and maybe a pallet of ammo.
Yes.
So,
that's perfect. I'd like to go back
yeah,
through
it was
those
fun.
and pick out the different weapon systems and those pictures they used to have of them
in the back cover. Right.
Yeah, everyone had something cool in there. I'm actually I have someone looking for number one all the way through. I think when they changed that artwork, when they changed from the Gil Hibben artwork, might have been like, let's say 1990, whenever that was. But there was a distinct 69-ish, 70, 72, 73. And then there was a shift. And then the early 80s, there was another shift artwork with Gil Hibben taking it over for those books. And probably a couple other people as well. But they had a similar look until they switched at a certain point. I think early 90s, not positive, but have someone looking for the whole entire collection, perfect condition for me right now, so I can go back and look at those all those weapons in the back.
I saw one.
Did you?
I saw a
full
collection
collection
once. Yeah.
Nice.
So I was a law enforcement technical advisor on a film that was shot up here in the 90s.
Oh, nice.
And
what was it?
Delivered. So Delivered, Ron Eldard, the actor from ER, is married to Juliana Margulies. He played Mike Durant in Black Hawk Down.
Oh, wow.
That guy. He was also an astronaut in like one of the astronaut movies. So anyway, it was about a pizza delivery guy who a serial killer follows him and knocks off every person that he's delivered pizzas to. So it looks like it's him.
That actually sounds like a great idea.
It's
not for serial killing, but for a book or something.
No, noted. So anyway, one of the production people had a cabin up here by Snoqualmie Falls. And we went over there, just a random, hey, we're going to have a like side meeting, that kind of a thing over a weekend. And down in the downstairs part of this big A-frame cabin was a wall of every single one of the Mac Bolin. And I wandered down the spiral staircase, turned around, and I saw that wall.
They exist.
I stayed there for 2.5 days.
Nice.
And would just come down and grab stuff and go upstairs and read it, and it was it was interesting. There was a
Nice.
guy there was a guy at the organization when I was there that was got jammed up on some side stuff, and one of the things that they had mentioned was like, "Hey, this guy's trying to run his own, like trying to run his own
Mm,
team." So
mm,
I bought him a Phoenix Force
that's hilarious.
copy number 1 and
That's
gave it to him
awesome.
and was like, "Hey, it's like Phoenix Force." And so then he knew it. He was like, "Yeah," he's like, "They think I'm trying to do my," and so that was the running joke was every 6 months or a year, you go out to your car to leave and there's like a copy of a Phoenix
Oh,
Force
that's
book and
fantastic.
something, and it was
You
so it's
do,
pretty
you do
interesting.
love the gift giving. I love it. I'm looking actually right here. I've tried to track down original Mac Bowen artwork. So I have a Cohen right here. It's a mashup, really. Mac Bowen from Stony Man. But it's all
Feels
original. It's
Stony
Phoenix
Man
Force
doctrine.
and an Able Team together
Yeah,
right here. So I have that right here. My wife got it framed for me a couple Christmases ago. I posted it
that's cool.
on Instagram, but I've been looking for the other cover art because it exists. It's out there. And these artists are getting a little older, and they sell off
Mhm.
parts of their estate or put it for auction or whatever. But I think I just missed the original artwork of individual covers. But I'll be looking.
Yeah.
I'll be looking. Like Evan Hafer got the original First Blood, which I just put away. I had David Morrell on the podcast. We're gonna drop that podcast in May on the 50th anniversary of
Oh,
First Blood
wow.
publication.
Oh, wow.
But the paperback, Evan's wife found the original artwork on eBay not that long ago,
Ah,
and he has it at the office down here in Salt Lake. Amazing, incredible, man. I know
yeah.
Evan,
I
from your
missed
time.
the chance to pick up original artwork from Argo.
Oh wow.
So the movie Argo that
Hmm.
came out while they were filming it, there was an ad in a organization newspaper, like a newsletter that goes around of like, "Hey, this is for sale on base," kind of a thing. And one of the employees was like, "I have original artwork."
Oh cool.
And we were in the middle of doing other stuff, so you're trying to like call people
Yeah.
and you're like, "Oh, does this have to be like, can I text you? Does it got to be on a secure line? Like how are you going to get this?" And I missed it, but it was one of those where right next to an ad to buy a bicycle or take over payments on a guy's bass boat,
That's
a
awesome.
person had put in like, "Hey, here's $50 each for these things that I've had since the operation
Wow.
back in the
Oh,
'80s,
that's
and this
wild.
is original artwork. They used it in the film again
Dang.
to be
That's
able to
crazy.
reference it." And I was like, "That'd be a neat thing to have, like on a
Yeah.
shelf." Yeah, missed it.
I have an
And the
original.
and the bass boat. Didn't get the bass boat either. So it was,
Didn't take over those payments.
it's a
I do have it's in the other room. The an original wanted poster for Bin Laden, not a reprint, after the
right.
fact, but an
Mhm.
original one from '98, I want to say. So I have that framed in the other room. But I love the pulp artwork on Pulp Fictions from the '60s and '70s and '80s is just awesome.
Yeah.
I just love that stuff.
Yeah.
It's so inappropriate today from
Yeah,
for
you probably couldn't get that you couldn't get that past the people probably today if you were like, "This is what I'm thinking."
Yeah. No, but
Thinking,
I actually do wanna do have someone make up pulp, like, if it was 19, let's say, 68 or
yeah,
1973 or something, and my books had come out back then, I wanna commission someone to do a cover in the style of those times and see what they
yeah,
come up with. I think
yeah,
that would be
I think it'd be
pretty
cool.
pretty cool, yeah.
Yeah,
Uh
I'd buy one.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, no, I love that stuff. I do want to ask you about life-saving medal, Medal of Valor, and law enforcement Medal of Honor because I know you won't talk about it unless I ask you
I will not,
specifically. Like what
but you have.
what happened that in those situations? Are those incidents from your time in law enforcement that stand
Yeah.
out in your head? Um,
Yeah, they were all the same day.
oh wow,
Yeah.
what happened?
So like I talked about before, small town, June 6th of that year. So we worked, I was working day shift at that time. So my shift started at 6 a.m. and went to 6 p.m. The night shift guy, obviously 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. He lived at the end. So where we're located is a small town that's attached to one of the San Juan Islands area type thing. So Camino Island. He lived out on the end of Camino Island. So we had decided and worked it out to where instead of rotating at 6, which would put him behind a school bus driving down an island for the next hour, we would swap at 5:30, and everybody was fine with it. Things were good. So, um, my dad had talked about retired out of the Seattle Fire Department. had been involved in all of the things for the 30 years that had gone on there. So one day back in May of that year, my wife and I were at his house with my mom, and we're all just hanging out, grilling food. And I said, hey, I work in the morning, early morning, and we're a bedroom community to, Boeing and Everett and Seattle. One of these days, somebody's going to wake up in the morning and their neighbor's house is going to be on fire. What do you do? And he took the time from a teaching standpoint to walk me around the home that he had built and I grew up in as a child, and took 30 years of firefighting experience and was like, here's where you go, here's what you do, here are absolutes. Um, this is how you're going to adjudicate that. And I was like, okay, cool. Now, preface that by, there was a blog that I wrote once under the training life that I had, about early on. I think I was 12 years old when he took me to the first house fire. We were in Eastern Washington. We were out camping at a family cabin campsite, driving down the road, and someone's home was on fire. And he was like, hey, come on, we got to go rescue these people. I'm like, okay. Like, shouldn't we check with mom? Like, maybe I'll stay in the truck. I'm 12. I mean, I'm tall, but I'm still 12. So, the morning of June 6th, June 6th or June 4th, it's been 30 years. So at 5:36 a.m., so 6 minutes after we rotate and swap duty roles, he's up in the shower. I'm down working. They tone out a fully involved house fire with subjects trapped inside. So one of the issues we have as a small town is a volunteer fire department. So there's a delay in how those things are going to work. So having just a month prior had this conversation around my childhood home with my dad, I was like, well, there's nobody else to go. So let's go up there and see what we can do. So all of those things revolve around that event. So when I arrived, there was an 84-year-old woman that I was able to rescue and get out of the structure. As I was pulling her out of the structure and getting her out, she mentioned that her son, who was in his 50s and confined to a wheelchair. She didn't say how old he was. She just said, my son is confined to a wheelchair. His name is John, and he's back in the other part of the house. And I was like, okay. So it's difficult to articulate how that becomes your problem, but I think you understand in a service piece that is now your problem, right? That's your next task, is you're gonna go deal with this. So I ended up making 5 more attempts. Got to the door that he was behind and was on the ground. My radio cord had already been melted through and all that stuff that I wasn't aware of. So I was calling out on my radio, but it's not going anywhere because it's the heat issues. But I got to the door that he was behind, and flames were coming through the bottom hinge because I was down on the ground. And I was like, well, I'm not opening that, right? Like, I'm not a fireman, but I know that's not a good idea. So, at that point, a lot of the things that I had talked about, that my dad had talked to me about, you get to a point where it's like, when it's difficult to breathe, carpet is a natural filter. So he's like, when you're finding it, if you're ever in a position where you're finding it difficult to breathe, press your face into the carpet and you can get clean breaths because of not only the carpet backing, the pad underneath. You're able to suck air up through basically a modified filter and take care of that. So, there's a couple of factors of this story that tie into it. One, she's a grandmotherly aged woman who has a son named John who's in a wheelchair just behind the door. When I went to high school, there was a guy older than me, year older than me, that was our star athlete. Great dude, looked up to him in everything. His name was John. He had been, after graduation, they were going to Alaska, taking the road, right? Because we're in Washington State, so people drive to Alaska all the time. So him and his family were driving to Alaska. He was asleep in the trailer part, like a camper on the back of the truck. They got in an accident and it paralyzed him. So he ended up in a wheelchair. Before I became a cop, his car he was with some friends and their car had broken down, and he was sitting in the car near my home where I grew up, and I backpack carried him to a house. The driveway was almost a mile long. So I backpack carry him to this house so we can go to the bathroom and just be there instead of sitting in the car because his buddies had already left. So there's my high school interaction with this guy that was just the best athlete in person ever. There's my post graduation interaction with packing him right that way after his accident. And then there's me as a cop, not knowing the home that he actually lived in, but in my mind, tying those two things together, thinking John is on the other side of that door. So I made 5 attempts to get to him. So full exits from the house, back in, places burning, structures starting to lose integrity. It's bad. I see the door, hinge line, there's flame, and I'm like, man, it's over. Between me and the door, part of the ceiling drops. So I see this smoking thing in front of me, and I was like, oh, yeah, like this whole thing is out of control. So roll over on my back, turn my flashlight off, right? Because it's the Streamlight SL20 XP that had the big old, polymer body and foam and all that. But it's such brightness in smoke that you can't see anything. It's like your high beams in fog. So once I kicked it off, I could see up in the ceiling just the tendrils of flame. It was to this day one of the most naturally beautiful and mesmerizing things I've ever seen. It is entirely captivating to see that living thing like just consuming and working and doing that. It was, and then the voice in my head was like, hey man, you're going to die in here. Like you need to go. So rolled over, took another breath, ended up getting out. When I got out, the fire department was arriving. I ended up in an ambulance going to the hospital. So
smoke inhalation.
Yeah, all of that, smoke inhalation, heart rate, like all that stuff was bad. So I wake up in the hospital later and I'm bawling because John died, right? And in my mind, I haven't separated, like it's the John that I know. So I'm dealing with that issue, right? Like you're not, like it's lost. You couldn't do your job, right? Like you're the reason for this whole thing. So one of the docs says, hey man, it's okay. He had a good life. And I'm like, no, he didn't, right? Like he's not much older than me. And they're like, well, what are you talking about? The guy's like 54 years old. And then I have this realization, like, wait a minute. Like I'm knowingly sacrificing this stuff for someone that I think is someone. And it wasn't. It was somebody else.
No kidding.
So like wipe the smoke and tears from my eyes. And I'm like, wait a minute. It's not the guy that I know. Like it's just a real stranger.
Yeah.
So years later, probably within the past 9 years, maybe, I found him, the John that I know.
Yeah.
And I went up, hung out with him, and I was like, let me tell you a story about when I went to save your life. And it wasn't you.
Wow.
Right. And so I share with him the whole thing and we're laughing and crying about it and having this whole, and I'm like, man, I'm like, I know that this thing needs to be done from a service standpoint. Right? Like I'm here, I'm the one to, and I'm like, and then it's not even you.
Yeah.
So he was like, sorry, I guess, like,
oh man, that's wild.
So yeah.
Jeez.
So then it gets into, that's the life-saving medal and the Medal of Valor. So the Medal of Valor is the highest award you can receive from your department. And then during this event, so like I said, we're a bedroom community. Everett Naval Station is 30 minutes down the highway. During this thing at 5:36 in the morning, in the middle of it, a naval officer comes out of his house to go to work, sees what's going on, apparently from his vantage point, watches me make these trips back and forth into this place. And he came in later, and this was all told to me later. He came in later and gave his account of what he saw that morning to my own leadership staff and was like, hey man, I don't know who that guy is, but this is what I saw.
Wow.
Um, so then I was put in for, on the state level, they do a law enforcement Medal of Honor that's awarded. It goes through
Wow.
like state Congress and the governor awards it. So I subsequently received that. The thing that's important to me about that is not so much that that happened, but that the year that I received it, they awarded 13 of those and 9 of them were posthumous. So
Wow.
those are the guys that legitimately are like, "Hey man, this is the sacrifice and service that those officers did. You know, I just did my job," standpoint. So,
Incredible. Jeez.
or the
What's your-
fireman's job because they didn't show up. But.
Yeah.
So
What-
the rivalry between police
Yeah.
and fire, I hold pretty steady.
Yeah.
So,
Well, you got both in
so
your
my-
blood, you know.
Yeah.
So after all those years at the agency, then jumping back there, developing those skills, shooting a ton, those friendships, people that we both know. When do you decide to get out and move on? And do you
We
want to
both
start
decided it.
Aries like right away, or is it like something that
Well,
happens a little bit after? What's that?
no,
What's
it
that
was
story?
quick.
Why did you move out?
It was quick.
on?
So it was time to move on. We both felt that. Like the organization started to change. I know that there are changes and standardization changes that, you know, your old team and unit experiences as well, where you're just like, hey man, this is different than what it was. They thought it was time. I thought it was time. And it was one of those where I had been away and separated from my family enough that when those other blocks start to fall in place or become a barrier and you start to recognize them that way, I was like, yeah, I'm going to get out of here. So when it came time to be done, we mutually were like, yeah, we're done.
Okay.
So I woke up, my wife, it was summertime, it was June 2018. My wife said, when you wake up tomorrow morning, if you could do anything you want to do, what would it be? And I said, oh, I'd make watches. I'd be a watchmaker. And she's like, then make watches. And because I'm a smartass, I said, I think there's 2 more steps. And she didn't bite on it. And she was like, hey, someone else figured out how to do it. So you can figure out how it needs to be done.
There you go.
And I was like, okay. So the interesting side of this to me was I then set about building Aries. Like this is what it's called. This is what the structure is. This is what we make. This is how we make it. And I took some time, it was less than a few weeks, to figure out, because I'd been in the watch world and knew guys through, you know, forums and groups and companies and all of that stuff. How do I take it? And then I had that conversation where it was like, are you going to make a watch or are you going to make a watch company? Because they're fundamentally different things. And I was like, I want to build a watch company. So I structured all of that out, set it all out. My wife's a school teacher, so it's not like we're Silver Spoon or we have a trust fund. And I laid everything out, sat her down. Our oldest at the time was over 18, so it would have affected him as well. So I sat them both down. He's now 23 and he makes all our quartz watches. So he's the one that you had written the books out to.
Okay, cool.
Caleb, the one that you've interacted with.
Talking with him.
Our other son, Jonah, is doing our social stuff.
Okay.
And he's the one that interviewed you for our...
That's it, Jonah.
Yeah, that was Jonah. So anyway, I said, this is what it's going to take and this is what we can do. And we either choose to do it or we don't choose to do it. I'm fine either way. I'll go find another gig. We can go do something else. But I believe in this and I believe we can make this and I believe we can build it. So my wife took a couple of days, which was fine. I was like, hey, don't answer me now. And I also said, which I think was super important, even if you say no, this isn't something I'm going to go do behind you. This isn't something that I'm going to, if we choose to do this moving forward as a group or not. And a couple of days later, she came back and she was like, yeah, let's do it. So at that point, I mean, everything that is on your wrist had to be created from somewhere.
Yeah.
So the design had to come from something. We had to cut it from something. We had to make it. We had to, the box has to be depicted. So all of that. And interestingly enough, now in our corporate space, in our office, the Aries clubhouse, basically, that we built here, this is when people walk in here, the way that I describe it easiest when I talked about how, hey, the podcast to me is therapy.
Mm,
This is how my brain translates what a space looks like.
mm.
So when you walk in here, it's Pelican cases full of watches. There's a 60-foot fast rope hanging outside the door. It's gear lockers and equipment. It's how I envision and how my brain translates. This is what our space is.
Nice.
And so then it's executing that. Like, what do you got to do?
Yeah.
Right. The road's not going away. You still got to run it.
Yeah.
So what are you going to do? And since then, it's both daunting and amazing to me that we're coming up in June, 4 years in.
4 years. I was just going to ask you that.
And it's like 4
how
years
long
in
was it from that discussion until the first watch was on your wrist?
We got prototype pieces built and made in November of that year.
And what was it? Would you say the date was? June. Wow.
It was June. So from June to November.
Amazing.
And then we started delivering those pieces after the first of the year. And then since then, it's just been a constant. It's just like,
so I got like one right away.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, what do you think you're not like come on.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Dude, thank you. I didn't realize it was so quick. So. Incredible. I mean, that's amazing. You were working hard.
I mean, we still are.
Yeah. I mean, for building something from the ground up. But I mean, from that discussion at the dining room table, kitchen table, to the first watch, to now this space that you have with a podcast studio where you have these clubs coming by, the Carr Club coming by to do special like events. I mean, you have grown a ton, all American made, all self-made. Like, you are crushing. I love those stories, and obviously love the watches. Yeah. But man, that is amazing. Congratulations.
It's something. I mean, it's one of those where, yeah. I mean, what's the other option?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? No, there is no other option. Yeah. So, get to work. So there was a line that I heard from one of the instructors at the Air Marshal program that I've kept, even in life and in everything else, from training and all of that. And what he had said was, so they introduced the scenario, whatever scenario you're going to go in. So anything in your SEAL life, or anybody listening in their own life, it translates directly across, because what he said was, you have a finite amount of time to successfully adjudicate your problem. So get to work. And I was like, man, I'm going to write that down. Like, I'm going to remember that, because
that's incredible.
Yeah, that is. And it's so telling on every level of what it is, because you can, from a business owner standpoint, and building all of this and trying to keep it moving and have momentum and gain, and it's slogging through things, that saying means different things at different layers of what you're doing, yet you have a finite amount of time to successfully adjudicate your problem. So get to work. And it was like, okay. And it's, how much is that time? I have no idea. It's cute that we think we get to know how much time that is. Yeah. So for me, what do you put off? And that's why, from a manufacturing standpoint, I want to build, we talk about being made in America. Those engines, the engine that drives our watches, are Swiss. The loom and the dial stuff is Swiss. So there's things that we don't make in-house because we're not the best people in the room to make it. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't stop us from trying to integrate it. Mm-hmm. So this is the very first titanium watch. Nice. So this is the titanium diver one. And we're cutting titanium on the other side of town at the shop. We're getting everything done here. But that's another piece where it's like, think of every piece of kit that you had in the teams, and then think of, man, I need to manufacture and make every piece of this kit. Mm. And then think of the secondary level of, okay, to even make something, what do you have to make?
Right.
So, we're creating tooling to make tools to make parts. And it blows my mind on one level. And then on the other level, it's like, well, yeah, what else are you going to do? There's nobody here that's going to you have a finite amount of time to get it done, man. So go to work.
Oh,
like, well, man, guess we're going to go to work.
I think you're going to like it when I send you In the Blood here soon. There's a watch time component to the whole thing, a passing on of wisdom from one generation to the next. And of course, it centers around a Rolex Submariner bought in
Yeah.
Saigon in
That his dad had, but
1968.
it was
Yeah.
stolen by that guy.
Yeah. He
Yeah.
gets it back, and then now, but it's coming back in here, but more from a the standpoint of time and how you spend it. But I love that line. I'm gonna have to incorporate that into a future novel somehow. But it's close to what I created without having heard that from you
Yeah.
for In the Blood. It really captures what I was going for there. But that's awesome. I love that. Incredible.
Yeah. I mean,
Man,
you gotta, some point, right? Like nobody's going to
gotta
come along and do
execute.
it for you.
Yeah, no, gotta
Yeah,
execute. What
absolutely.
but you did what was Graham Combat about? Did you do that for a little bit? Was that bridging
Yeah.
the
So that's
gap?
training. Yeah.
Yeah.
That
You
is
still doing that?
exactly bridging the gap. No, no.
Done. Okay.
Stopped doing it. Last year was the very last, did a kill house class, um, which is basically a shoot house class, right?
Mm,
Individual response to dynamic environments. Um, I called it kill house because that's the original term,
mm,
right?
mhm.
From back in the day
Back in the
that then
day.
became, oh, that's so offensive. And I was like,
Mm.
okay, that's what we're going to pick. So, um, so yeah, Graham Combat was definitely a bridge
Okay.
between the life I was having
Yeah.
training others and then those around me from my law enforcement background, from the air marshal background, were
Yeah.
like, hey man, like where do we benefit? Like, what do we get?
Yeah.
Where's the fruits that we get from all of that and what we're doing? So, um, ran that for quite a while. So that came from initially when I got involved in training, we were doing Colt's live fire training program.
Mm.
So myself and another former Marine who was also a law enforcement guy, Rich Jones, we developed Colt's live fire training
Oh, wow.
program and ran that under the people that were running Colt at the time. And then I went off to the air marshals, and after that went into the other aspect of life, and it was
Got
that
it.
constant teaching piece. I mean,
Yeah.
I all of those people. So the fire event that we talked about, the
Uh-huh.
success of that event, even though there was loss of life, the success of that event came from an individual who was immersed in that culture teaching me
Uh,
the benchmarks. Okay. The one of the things that I'm thankful for was that individual happened to be my dad. So that teaching was very
mhm.
close. In all of the other aspects of my life, there have been teachers who have been pivotal in my learning and in my path. So I approached Graham Combat as, because you and I have both been to courses, we've both been involved in things where you're like, man, this is, I hope somebody's checking a box somewhere because this is, I'd
Mm.
rather be somewhere else. So I built Graham Combat as classes that I wished I could go to,
Yeah.
because as a student, the way that I would convey the information and translate the information was important to me from that aspect. So, um, but yeah, that I don't do that anymore
Yeah.
because I'm kind of busy doing this.
Kind of busy. Yeah.
And
I wish I'd gotten in a class with you over the years, because I need a little tune up right now. I'm doing a lot more typing than I'm doing training.
yeah,
Luckily, I had a very solid foundation, but yeah, we'll have to get on the range together at some point
I'd
along
love
the
to.
line here.
Yeah,
That'd be incredible.
yeah.
And I know you've been so kind with your time here, but I do want to ask you about lessons learned. Have there been a couple over the last years building this business that you want to pass on to anybody else, other entrepreneurs that are starting out, going down this path, found their passion, and
Yeah,
running into a
absolutely.
roadblock here or there? But what have you learned over the last couple of years as far as maybe obstacles or lessons in business?
Well, I think that's the first one is the way that I look at it and the way that you're describing it is those obstacles is how do you deal with obstacles fundamentally.
Hmm.
So if you look at something and see it as an obstacle and it's a barrier, then there are times where you're going to want to just turn around and go away from that barrier, right? Road's closed, we're not able to go down there. And for me, those obstacles is like, well, how am I going to get through that obstacle? Right? Can I climb it? Can I go around it? Can I breach it?
Yeah.
Is it what do I do? Because there is no other option. So one of the things that was often said that I had heard was, I can't want it for you more than you do.
Hmm.
right? I can will you and hope that you know, pass this qualification, but if you don't want to be here, right? If you're going to ring out or you're going to do something else, well, then you're going to do that. I can't want it for you more than you
Right.
want it for yourself. So for me, it is, I think, uh, equal parts drive
Yeah.
and determination to an absolute flip side of the coin of pure ignorance. just
Sometimes
just
that's
an
helpful, actually.
just an
Yeah.
absolute unaccounting of, oh, here's the daunting task in front of you,
Yeah.
and be like, well, that still needs to be done,
Sure.
right? And that's a characteristic thread through a service type of life. It's like, hey, man, it's cold, it's wet, it's all this other stuff. That none of that's going to go away, right? You
Mhm.
have a finite amount of time, so get to work. And that's
Right.
where, for me, from a business standpoint, we started this with our minimal savings,
Mm.
right? Like, this is it. Like, this is the money we have, and we can move forward and we can do this thing. So I had this conversation with Evan a couple of months ago when I was down there. Um, of I continued to address from a financial standpoint, right? Because it's a limited pot of money. So
Mhm.
everything you're going to do. So for us as a business, everything just keeps generating how we can do this. But, you know, I would write out, I'm the cook in our family if we
Mm.
want to eat. So, there's, can you go to Whole Foods and get that food, or can you go to the dollar store and get those things? Like, yeah, at some point you're scraping and you're doing everything you can to get it together, recognizing that, like, hey man, there's a goal here that we're working towards. There's a piece at the end of this that, your
Mhm.
apple gets fresher and bigger every time, to be able to do that. So I know that part of me being, if we can look at Aries as being a success, which I don't yet, like, I think we're doing well. I think we're good. I like what we make. And we are solid from a foundation aspect, but I didn't get into building this business um, as a 1 to 2 year piece. When I
Right.
sat down and wrote the business plan to then talk to my wife and kids about, I said, I'll run Aries for the first 20 years. And here is that 20-year plan.
Mm.
One of the things that was difficult at the agency, and one of the guys that I used to work with in for said it very well, because of the rotation that happens, is it's hard to have a 5-year plan with 2-year people.
Mm.
And so for me with this, what are you trying to build? I'm trying to build longevity and security for me and my family for a long time.
Yeah.
Well, then my plan can't be a 2-year plan, right? My focus can't be, hey, just get a watch on Jack's wrist and we're going to be good.
Mhm.
That's not it, right? And it's, how do we build something that has longevity and staying power? So everything which is harder. It's significant. It would be a lot easier to do this if I didn't choose to do it here.
Mm.
And that is 100% the truth of manufacturing in the United States today.
Yeah.
This would be a hell of a lot easier if we just didn't stick to what our belief system is. That being said, if I didn't stick to my belief system, is this the time that I'm going to compromise? Right? Like, of all the things in life and service that we've been fortunate enough to be able to do, oh, this is where you're going to compromise what you believe in? Like, come on, man, this is easy day. I mean, I know I'm going to sleep in my bed tonight.
Yeah.
I know I'm going to have a good lunch probably. So now is not the time to start sacrificing what we do. So, um, the only person that believes legitimately at the end of the day, you're going to be a writer and write that book, Jack, was you,
Mhm.
right? Everybody around you can give you the love and support, and, your mom being a librarian, giving you books and just burning in and out of that building, being like, hey, give me everything I can support that. But at the end of the day, who's the person under the load on the slog?
Mhm.
Is you. So if you believe in it and don't compromise the belief in that, then you can do it. And that's what I'm doing. Hey, man, I want to build the finest hard use mission timer that I can.
Yeah.
And then from that, be like, okay, if I believe in that and I'm going to make it, then I'm going to make it. And you know who I make every single one of those for? The same people that you write your books for. You write your book for you. And it's just guys like me and millions of other people that happen to love them. I make that watch for me. I built the mission timer that I wanted to have when I was working. Now, the good part about that is the characteristics of that timer also appeal to a guy like yourself and other people in the world that are like, man, you know what? I like that too. So I don't know why. And I want to talk to you about this at some point, because I've brought it up with Evan and others, the negativity and the negative side, because we all have the voice, right? We all have that voice in there that is just at times jawing away and can be daunting and be like, hey, man, it's a lot easier to quit this than it is to keep going. But is it? So typically it's the quitting aspect of it, or the listening to the voice that's negative and telling you can't do it. It seems like the easy fix at times. The hard one is being able to contain that and continue to go. So for me, I just know that there is no other option. Nothing else is putting food on the table. I could go do those other things, but those things either take me away from my family or take me away from the things that I, want to do at this point in my life. So I'm curious, how do you manage and mitigate that? I know one of the things you do that we talked about, and I love when you do it, is read the negative review side. But, there's also that piece that, I don't know, I'll let you talk about it, but I just think that each one of us, regardless of whether you're you, which is amazing, by the way, or me and doing what we're doing here, or just the casual listener in their own life of dealing with like the struggle of, it's when someone else echoes that voice that we all have of be like, hey man, maybe we should just back out of this. How do you stay on path with being like, nope, I'm going to take you and I'm going to silence you a little bit. And I'm going to tuck you away and I'll deal with you at another time.
Yeah, I guess I
How
never
do
really
you
thought
deal
of
with
it
that?
in those terms before. There's of course little discouragements that we all have. There are
Mhm.
things you did hit, of course, but that's expected. Never
Yeah.
let it be a surprise that, hey, someone's going to hate my book and going to write a horrible review, or someone's going to write a review and not even have read it just because they think they know a political view and they want to just hurt me.
Yeah.
That's just, don't let that be a surprise. That's just a part of the world that we're in. And life's going to throw hard things at you. Like, you're going to have setbacks. You're going to get hit. You're going to hit hard. That is a part of life. It has been a part of life from the beginning of time until now. So don't let it be a shock when it
Mhm.
happens to you. And then, so what are you going to do? You're going to sit there and think about how hard life is.
Right.
It's hard. Like, it's already
Yeah.
there. You already know
Yeah.
that. You already know you're going to get hit. So when that happens, how long are you going to then stay down? Okay, you can take a breath. You can get knocked down. You can
That's what
take
I
a breath.
like
That's
about it
okay.
though, is
That's
when you
okay.
say you could take a breath.
Yeah, take a
Like, hey
breath.
man, you got time to, yeah.
Yeah, but eventually you have to get back up.
Yep.
Like, it's that
Yeah.
is for sure.
There's just no other
But
option.
there's no other option. But the option is how you get back up. Now
Right.
you can like get back up complaining and whining and bringing people down around you by this negative energy that you're giving off because you had it so hard or whatever it was, or you can get back up and be an example to those around you, however large or small that circle is, whether it's a wife, whether it's a wife and one child, whether it's a wife and three kids, whether it's a wife and three kids and one friend, whatever it is, or 35 million people today, for people that are out there
Right.
that have these social followings online that you couldn't have had 40 years ago, 30 years ago. So that's the choice, that how you get back up, and that's what's important, and that's what defines your character, and that's how you inspire those around you. But that's a choice. You get to choose either way. You get to
Right.
choose whether you can get back up stumbling and crying and whining and being negative and not helping those others around you, or you can get back up and choose to get back up in a way that helps those around you in your circle, however large or small that is. So that's the choice.
Yeah.
So
I
I
think
so I
that
kind of look at
goes
it in those terms.
and I think that goes directly to the question you asked me about, like, what advice would we give to a new entrepreneur or somebody starting their business, is exactly that. It's how you're going to do it. hey man, this is the character and this is the way that I'm going to move it forward and this is what we're going to believe in. And then I'm going to continue to do those things, whether or not, right? Like, however the sea's the sea, man. We're not going to change it. So it's like, is it just going to be, are we in an easy part of the journey or a hard part of the journey?
If you're
But
an easy part of the journey, that's time to prep for the times when
yeah,
it's when
start
the
getting your,
storm's
start
coming.
get,
That's
yeah,
that
start
time to
getting your,
prep for the
start getting your
storm isn't
stuff
in the
together.
middle of it. Take some notes
Yep.
when you're in the middle of it,
Yeah.
so that you're better next time because another storm is
Yeah.
coming.
Yeah.
You know, and that's not just not being paranoid. That's just being aware, prepared, good example. All
Yeah.
those sorts of things, which just
And
makes
then, a-
sense.
and then how do you perceive those? We had one of those pretty significantly in this past year of trying to get our manufacturing done in-house. There's a local we're in the Pacific Northwest, right? There's a lot of aerospace and defense
Mm,
companies up here. So there's a local one that we had gone to that started cutting all of our components here. So those
mhm,
main components of that case and all of those big steel pieces on your wrist, we were cutting closer to home, which is exactly what I want, right? Ideally, I'd want them in my same building that I'm in
mhm.
right now, but we'll get there, baby steps.
Nice.
Um, and we ran into a manufacturing problem with them that we weren't made aware of. They
Mm,
had done some things on their end to try to help themselves out that ended up
mhm,
being detrimental to us.
mhm,
Um, we ended up out of 800 pieces that we were cutting, we had about an 8%, just under 8% rate of those. So if you look at the face of your watch right now, when your bezel
mhm.
lines up with
Yeah.
12 o'clock, they had cut the case in such a way because they had compromised the manufacturing integrity,
It was a little off.
unbeknownst to us. So they had started the job, had it on the machines, and then to go do other stuff, they took our job off the machine, which you don't do when you're making
Mm,
something, right? And then when they came back and set it up again, they set it up wrong, and we had about an 8% swath of that. So if you think of it as two cans of 5.56 sitting in front of you,
yeah.
and you have 8% of those rounds that you don't know if they're going to fire or not because you can't tell by looking. So how do you deal with it? So it was a problem, and what we were able to do was through better engineering and better math from our side.
Mm,
So if you look at your timer right now, that 12 o'clock index point, there is a single hole drilled in your case underneath that bezel that keeps that bezel aligned.
okay.
And what we were able to do through math was now we cut 4 holes. So within those 4 holes, they visually translate to 1/4 minute. So now we can clock,
Mm,
much like headspace and timing, we can clock that bezel based on variances and variabilities from a manufacturing end. So we got a solid steel-toed boot kick to the nuts.
mm,
Like it was a standby to get blasted.
yeah.
And then from that, we were able to be like, well, how are we going to deal with it? And
Right.
I'm like, well, here's a way that we can deal with it, that we come out of it not only solid in what we're making, right? Going to a new place now, not that place.
Okay.
But in addition to that, having an engineering design that gives us the ability to now account for, if we go back to that headspace and timing analogy, variances and everything else that happens. So
Huh.
it was it was tough, and while I was in it, it was one of those things that it
Yeah.
was unique to have to deal with, but gave us the ability to now on our end be like, you know what, we have an exponentially better piece that we're able to put onto the wrist of somebody, that
That's
we didn't
awesome.
have before,
Yeah.
that we never would have invented, we never would have come up with because we didn't have that problem. So
It,
again,
it's
is it a
incredible.
barrier,
Yeah.
or is it just like, okay, well, this isn't
Yeah.
the hardest thing,
No, it's
you know?
amazing how many
So
times things that are problems end up actually propelling you forward because it forces you to deal, it forces you to adapt, it forces you to do the thing that on the battlefield you have to be doing constantly because the enemy
yeah,
is doing it. So when something like that happens, it's amazing how you come out better for it, superior product in your case. So that's yeah, it's all about looking for those gaps in the enemy's defenses,
absolutely.
capitalizing on momentum, and adapting because that's what the enemy is doing to you. And sometimes you got to do pretty quick, hence time.
Yeah, Absolutely.
Dude, so what's in here? Do I need to open this right now?
Yeah. So you had talked about you wanted to do a giveaway.
Yes.
Well, there you go.
So
Crack
here-
that bad boy open
So I
and
open
check
this
it
thing
out.
up here. Let's see what we got
Good.
here. And yeah, no, this is awesome. And I love, now I know the story around the kitchen table. I don't know if people can see that, established 2018.
You
Right
got your
there.
skiff sticker on there?
So I do.
there's
I do. That's why I didn't open it. I was going through things, and I as a half-face blade right here, but I got that, and I noticed this on the other watches too. I had it's been coming in different cases. You have had a couple like so cool.
Yeah.
These different things that you've done. I love the creative side of this, but I almost opened this the other night because I thought you said there was two coming, and which there's another one, but I was just going so fast, and I was almost like, and I saw this, and I was like, wait a second, and I actually went back to our text, and I was like, I'm just gonna hold off just in case this isn't the one I'm supposed to open. I'm not clear on exactly which one I'm supposed to open right now, but let's take a look here what we have going on. But
so this is the
that
thing
one
that's
right
this is the thing that's funny to me is I'm sitting here quiet with anticipation, like I don't know what's already in the box. like it's like, oh, what is it? And I'm like, come on, man. Like this is
look at
what's
that.
he gonna open?
I don't know if people can see that. There's the skiff tape. So I had two things I had to cut through there, but that was the skiff one. I think it was this one the other night that caused me pause. I don't think this one the red one didn't cause me pause, but I got to this one. I was like, wait a second.
So there's a lot of people. There's a subsect of Aries watch users who can't wear timers, right? Can't wear G-Shocks, can't wear all the other electronic watches because of the environments they work in, right? Because you can't go in a skiff with anything like that. Like if it has any aspect of connectivity, you can't be in a skiff. So guys would reach out, and one of the things that they would commonly say is like, hey man, this is good in a skiff, right? Like I can wear this in it. And I'm like, yeah, it's no different than wearing, so then I was like, you know what? We should put that on there.
Nice.
For people that, I mean, that's one of those Easter egg pieces that means something legitimately to you. Like you'd be like, oh yeah, okay. To the majority of people that don't work in and around that environment, it doesn't mean much, but it's one of those little things where it's
that's
like,
pretty cool. I love the little things. The little things matter.
They do. And then there's that pretty bag.
There it is.
There's the burn bag. So our burn bags, the burn bags that I grew up with, or not grew up with, but professionally dealt with, are exactly those.
Yes. So for those wondering what a burn bag is, it was like a trash can for stuff that needed to be burned, essentially, or not a trash can, a trash bag that needed to be burned.
It's exactly a grocery bag. So think of your now paper grocery bag. It has the red and white lines painted on it. On the bottom of it, it says, classified for destruction of classified material.
Yeah.
So when I was looking at packaging the Diver ones, like, how do you do it? Right? How do you package it? It's not like and so for me, just like creating this Aries clubhouse that I'm in, when I decided to package the watch, I was like, well, I'll wrap them in a burn bag. Well, here, as an aside, I will say, hey, Jack, you got any idea how hard it is to get burn bags? And I'm like, it's fairly difficult. So when it's not easy. So I was able to buy.
You can't just get them on Amazon? I kind of figured you'd be able to get them on Amazon.
I bought a pallet of burn bags from a GSA supplier. And I was still in the Connex, working out of the Connex at the house. So the delivery truck pulls up. The guy kind of like looks at the Connex, looks at me, looks at the burn bags, and is like, And I'm like,
like he knew?
Well, he did. Who knows what he knows?
Yeah.
But yeah, we have the use of a burn bag is directed by all of those policies and procedures put in place by the Director of National Intelligence. So burn bags have recently changed.
Oh, really?
So now they are like just a brown paper bag that says like classified on the side.
Okay. So they don't look like this anymore?
Yeah. So what I'm doing is, as we use the stock of what we have, I've reached out to grocery shop bag manufacturers and said, I need these bags printed because
that's awesome.
To me, it's not good enough to be like, well, I could put some white and red lines on something and be like, no, I want bags made that are a bag, because we take a bag and cut it down to that.
Yeah.
So
that's awesome. That's
yeah.
Like I said, it's those little things. It's those little. So this is one we're giving away.
Yeah. Check the case back.
see, I don't want to cut because I have to cut into it, or should I just peel this off?
Just peel the sticker off, pull the strap out a little bit, and check the case back
All right,
because
so
you should recognize some stuff on the back of that.
here. Oh, man. Yep. Bam. There we go. Oh, that is cool. I want to snip it and show
Yeah, you should.
people.
I mean,
right
it's
here.
from you, so it's not that.
I guess I don't need to keep that on there, but that. Oh man, dude, is that the one?
I believe on that tag too, the tested tag that you have right there.
Yeah.
I believe it. I wrote the serial number at the top. Is that
Awesome. Yep.
Carr 01?
Carr 001.
1,000 meter test.
Dude, this is awesome. So we're giving this one away.
Yeah, you had said, "Hey,
Wow.
let's do a giveaway."
Amazing.
And I'm always down. Like, you know that. As soon as the first text comes in of like, "Hey, I have an idea," I'm like, "Yeah, I'm down." You're like, "You don't even know what it is yet." I'm like, "That's okay."
I know, that was so
can't be-
awesome. That was so
It's either-
awesome.
Going to involve cool kit, cool drinks, or cool
Dude,
times. So yeah,
know if people
why
can
would I not
see.
Roger up?
right there. You can see that tomahawks right there.
Cross tomahawks with the Carr 001.
Dude,
And that's the one you wear.
those came out
just different than so that was the one that you wanted to do. And then there was another project that you wanted to do based
Yeah.
upon the show coming out. And I don't know if you want to chat about that or not.
We had talked about a lot of ideas. Is that in the one on the front?
Yeah. So do you want me to show you that?
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Hang on.
Okay.
Let me grab it.
Dude, this is awesome. Dude, that's rad.
So there's one of those things where the depth of love that I have for you extends to things because you still use the word like rad that I use all the time.
I got to do
Or-
it for the
and I-
80s throwback. You know what I mean?
I also know that if someone were to publish our texts, that there would be a few from me that say like awesome sauce. And I'm like, yeah, I say awesome sauce.
Hey, why not? Oh, man. Look at that.
So there's that type
That's awesome. Look at that.
awesome sauce.
Dude.
There's a little cross tomahawks right there that we had.
Nice.
There's also
Nice.
one that I did. I don't know if you want me to show you this one.
Let's see.
The designer in me was like, hey, let's do one that's a little bit bigger. So I might build this and give it to you,
Dude, look at that.
which is like,
That's pretty sick.
Yeah, right.
Man.
So those,
Wow.
we just did those. So that's one
No
of those where it was
way.
like, yeah. So we're going to build those up. And that was
Wow.
to do the prime launch,
Wow. Amazing.
your show, right?
Yeah. July 1st. Coming in
So,
hot.
dude,
It's
we're
looking
gonna have
good.
we're going to have a viewing party right over there in the
Dude,
Aries
that's awesome.
clubhouse.
You'll have to get the remote on and pause it at a certain scene. I'll prep you ahead of time, like what episode, where you can for sure see it. And it's on other people's wrists. I just don't know how prominent, because you're doing this stuff and you're moving.
Yeah, and we
all
did a
that
couple
stuff.
of things. Like we sent out some GMTs and we sent out some autos, and the prop guy
Yeah.
is one of the guys that on
Gary
our
Tours.
podcast. Yeah, I'd like to get him on and be able to talk about stuff because
He's awesome.
about, like all these other things that were going on. So I was like, that'd be neat.
Yeah, he's a third
So-
generation prop
Oh, wow.
master, but he's like fourth generation Hollywood. I think that's it. So it like the beginning.
Like,
yeah.
yeah.
And then
Yeah.
next generation was
like-
prop master, but there was a connection there. Like
They
in
were
the
doing
beginning.
like the first documentaries of the
Something.
gold rush.
Yeah.
Right, where
He's such an
there
awesome dude.
is-
He went above and beyond for all the props and the weapons and the terminal list. Like he did an incredible job. But yeah, dude, this is just too cool. It's one we did last year. People love that. I mean, people just love your watches, love what you're doing. And that engagement piece, and people want to know who they're getting something from these days, not just a product. Maybe it's already an established huge company, different, but when they're doing something like this, like they want to know the person behind it. They want to know about they want to know about their family, what's important to them. That's just a part of today of
Well, and
being
that's
in
the
this
thing
in any space where you're doing something like a boutique type of a
Yeah.
type of a product.
And that's the thing that I celebrate it. I love it. I think it's important for how we're doing it. Our oldest boy, Caleb, is our quartz watch watchmaker. He just moved to San Diego, right? So he's down there. Because when I built the company, I built it off a template of being decentralized,
Yeah.
knowing that if the best watchmaker isn't here, then how do you get them? So it was like, hey, I can run this thing out of a Connex. You know, my wife's like, hey, are you going to build this company out of a Connex? I'm like, we've conquered the world out of a Connex. I think we
Yeah.
can run a business out of one. So,
Nice.
so for me, it's always interesting because that timer that you're holding that we're giving away, we cut here. So we cut that from steel, stamped here and done. Jonah, my other son, deburred that and shot that with our bead blast to get that finish on it that's consistent. So the interesting part of it is the hand built nature of that timer. We get pushback from people that are like, hey, this isn't as clean as it could be like other big brands.
Uh,
I'm like, I
It's
don't
clean to
think you
me.
understand. I'm like, I don't think you understand what you're getting. Like, this is the,
I don't know what they're
you know,
talking
like,
about because
well,
all of
and
mine and this is
and
incredibly clean.
the idea of it is cleanliness to me is that we're making it.
Yeah.
So if there is, if you were to set 6 of these things next to each other on a whole, they're going to look the same, right? Because they're uniform. But individually, is there a machining mark that is different on one of the cases that isn't on yours? And it's like, how interesting has the world gotten that in making something by hand for
Yeah. Yeah.
you is now pushed back against and being like, no, I want it to where you can't tell. And I'm like,
Oh,
well, then you know what? Maybe we're not your guy.
yeah. Maybe somewhere else, but I'll
So
tell you what, like I
yeah,
have 4 of them now here in front of me. And this is awesome. I love this one also that
yeah,
has the red secondhand.
yep,
Love I mean, they all look incredible. And I would never have looked at one and been like, oh, look at there's something wrong or this is different.
yeah.
Like there's
Well, see, and I
these
think
are
that's the
amazing.
difference. I think that's the way that you as an individual and I as an individual and a lot of people that enjoy us and the things that we make and create approach tools and kit where, you know, it's like I've never looked at anything that I've bought under 10 and 20 power magnification
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
called
And
the
trying to
guy
find
that
something.
made the backpack and was like, hey, I think you're an asshole. Like
Oh,
it's ridiculous. So for me, it's just like, hey man, it's a tool. And just like in an armory, go run that tool. We
mhm.
make that here so you can go utilize it. Go run that thing as much as you can. And if at any time it needs to come back and we retune it, right? It needs to get like things you're
Mhm.
familiar with. If it needs to get rebarreled, if we need to put something else on it, if we
Mhm.
need to do all these other things, then we do them. And that's to me, the idea behind how we implement our timers. Hey man,
Yeah.
they're supposed to be crushed. Like, take joy in the fact that your life isn't being lived under the sacrifice that other guys are doing with it. And they're like, and that's the thing is I never hear from the guys,
Mhm.
right? It's like the review thing that you
Yeah.
talk about. Like you
Right.
read the bad ones, the
Right.
millions of
Yeah.
people that are like just, you know, blessed to even read it
Yeah.
are excited about it, right? It's the
Yep.
so I enjoy it. I love it. We all love it here.
Oh,
We enjoy making them.
man, they're so awesome. And gosh, yeah, I sincerely appreciate all you've done for me, my
Oh,
family, the country, of course. And I love seeing you move on into this, being so passionate about it and creating something that is so dang cool. And
well, thank you. That means
yeah,
a lot.
well, I mean,
It
you're an
does mean a
example
lot.
for, and you don't even know how many people you're an example for, because there's so many people that are in government service, that are in law enforcement, that are firefighters that maybe want to do that next thing. They're not quite sure about it. And then they see someone like you do this and they're like, yes, I can do it. Like I saw these guys growing up on the top of the New York Times list. I can do that too. But it's just inspiring without even meaning to be inspiring to a whole bunch of, and it
Yeah.
might not
I'm
even
just
be watches. It's something else. It's
yeah.
just going after whatever they are passionate about. And it happens to be watches in your case. It happens to be writing in my case, but it can be really anything in life, and you can get out there and crush it. And thanks for leading by example, my friend. This
Well,
is awesome.
thanks for feeling that way. You know what I mean? Like it's one of those where in my heart, we're building the best thing we can build for the most extreme, and everything short of that is easy day, right? So let's go with it.
Let's do it. Let's do it. And I'm excited for what's ahead. I don't know if I can even ask you about it. You might want, I don't know if you want to keep it under wraps, or where you're going, or what you're thinking about as far as expansion or new products or whatever you're thinking. But whatever it is, I'm excited for it.
Well, thank you. Yeah, we're just doing. I'm a advocate and believer in the plan your dive and dive your plan. So we're still diving the initial plan of the diver one. So right now we just introduced our titanium. So we're cutting all our titanium, getting all of that done. So it's a lighter weight and the same chassis design. It just gives a better performance envelope. And then I'm toying with a chronograph. So I've got a safe full of chronographs in there that I would like to kick out and see what we could do. For me, I'm still in the design stage of what does a chronograph look like if we don't change that case very much.
Right.
Because I don't want to make something else.
Right.
Like let's take what we got. So
it's
like the double stack 1911 as opposed to the single.
Yeah.
So
there you go. There you go. So. Well, whatever is ahead, I'm excited for it. I can't wait to see the chronograph because I do like those. I don't know if I brought any out here or not. I don't think. Well, yeah.
There's more math involved in making those.
Yeah. No, exactly. Yeah, I got a panorama that has one right here. But I mean, those are so cool, and there's got to be a lot more to it. A lot more that can go wrong. It seems like
2 more steps.
2 more steps. Yep. Oh man, awesome. But hey, thank you so much for everything.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it, and we got to get on the range one of these days soon.
Anytime, man. I'll drive down. You know that.
Tune up. Definitely need a tune up, and drive down in Land Cruiser. Still got it?
Oh yeah, got a couple of them.
How long have you had the longest?
15.
Nice.
15 years we've been. Yeah. So I have 2 62s.
Okay.
One, I'm going to do a body off myself with the boys. We're going to build that up. And then the other one is nicer and doesn't need that. It's the one that we kind of tool around in. But yeah, I'm sitting there on Craigslist all the time. And that was one of the things, I don't know if I mentioned it to you. You had done a post about the Land Rover, the Defender 110.
Yeah.
And I was sitting in bed and you're like, hey, thanks to a buddy for letting me use this Defender 110. And I looked over at my wife and I was like, thank God he doesn't have the Defender 110, because this son of a bitch has every car that I want stacked up in his driveway. And my wife was like, oh, thank God. Like, you can stop looking for your 110. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to stop. I'm not going to stop looking.
Yeah. No, there's the right one out there. Yeah, there's the right one out there for sure. And when you're down this way, next time you'll have to drop on by the house and we can take a look at they're replicating like rabbits around here.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. I am on my way. So
awesome, man.
Cool.
Awesome.
Thanks for having me, brother.
Dude, thank you so much for doing it. And hopefully we'll link up in person again soon.
Absolutely. God bless, man.
You take care. Navy Federal Credit Union. I've actually been a member since 1996, the year that I joined the Navy. And Navy Federal Credit Union wants to thank the men and women in the U.S. military for their important commitment to our country. For more than 85 years, Navy Federal Credit Union has made it their mission to help people in the military community. Navy Federal Credit Union is open to all branches of the military, veterans, and their families. Navy Federal's employees are veterans and military spouses, so they're part of the community they serve, and they understand their members better than anyone. Members can enjoy an average earning and savings of $352 per year, a savings rate 3 times the industry average. An average credit card, APR 5% lower than the industry average, award-winning 24/7 stateside member service, over 350 branches worldwide. Show your own support for our troops with #MissionMilitaryThanks. Learn more about how Navy Federal is celebrating the commitment that connects them to their members at NavyFederal.org/celebrate. And I also have to read that this is insured by NCUA. Dollar value represents the results of the 2020 Navy Federal Member Give Back Study. Value claim based on Navy Federal's 2020 Member Give Back Study. Credit card value claim based on 2020 Navy Federal as low as APR averages compared to advertised industry APR averages as of December 31st, 2020, published on creditcards.com. Thanks so much. Check out NavyFederal.org. I want to thank my friends at Black Rifle Coffee for sponsoring the Danger Close podcast. I've been a huge fan for the longest time. Drink Black Rifle Coffee every day. And if you keep your eyes peeled, you will notice that perhaps Chris Pratt is wearing a Black Rifle Coffee t-shirt, not unsimilar to this one, in the Amazon series adaptation of The Terminal List. Now you can go to blackriflecoffee.com/dangerclose and use code DangerClose20 at checkout for 20% off your purchase and your first coffee club order. Black Rifle Coffee, America's coffee. Keep crushing. Thank you so much to SIG Sauer for jumping right on board out of the gate to make this podcast possible. Obviously, I am a huge SIG fan, having carried the P226 on every deployment downrange in the SEAL teams. But SIG was a supporter. They were friends well before I was a New York Times bestselling author, well before I even had an Instagram account or any social media presence whatsoever. So thank you guys all so much. Ron, Tom, Jason, everybody at SIG who gets up every day and continues to crush it and lead the way. SIG is always adapting. They're always at the forefront, whether it is firearms for citizens, whether it's firearms for our military, ammo, suppressors, optics, training, fire control units. They are doing it all, and they are always pushing that envelope and trying to do it better each and every day through innovation and adaptation. They crush. So thank you so much for that friendship and support. It will never be forgotten. Welcome to the gear highlight portion of the Danger Close podcast. With my guest today being Matt Graham of Aries Watches, it only made sense to talk about Aries watches. So I'm a huge fan right here, as you can tell. The Diver one, amazing. They also make a GMT. I'm going to have to get one of those for sure because I'm such a fan of the watch, of the brand, of Matt Graham in particular. What an awesome guy. And just love when people who have given so much to the country get out, follow that passion, and crush it in the next chapter of life. So Aries Watches, that's ARES watches.com, and then Aries Watches CO on Instagram. So follow him there, get on their mailing list. And if you watch the podcast, you know that we're giving away a very cool watch that is in here. That is one of a kind. So we're going to figure out that giveaway. But if you're interested, sign up for the Aries newsletter. Sign up for my newsletter. You can go to officialjackcarr.com. We'll probably put the information on the giveaway for this watch in those newsletters, and then also on Instagram. So follow Matt Graham, Aries Watches CO on Instagram, and I am at Jack Carr USA on Instagram. So that'll be the place where you can go to find out about this giveaway. Thank you for tuning in to the Danger Close podcast, an Ironclad original presented by Navy Federal Credit Union. Find out more about Matt Graham at arieswatches.com, and you can follow him on Instagram, Aries Watch CO. So be sure and check out all that he has going on there. Get yourself a mission timer. Awesome. Huge fan. You can follow me at Jack Carr USA on the social channels. Officialjackcarr.com is the email. JackCarrUSA.com is the merch. In the Blood comes out on May 17th and is available for pre-order right now. If you like this conversation, be sure and leave a 5-star rating and review wherever you get your podcasts. And until the next time, take care out there. Be safe. Stay strong. Keep fighting.